Part 29. The Rebirth of Space, the Lucky Girl from a Farm Family. Author, He Would Fire Every. Chapter 281. Chapter 281 The Truth. Qingyu has other arrangements, and I will send the princess back, Junsheng replied while putting down the footstool. Shi Niang asked as she walked towards the carriage, has the princess eaten? Gu Huayu said, Qinjian should stay and have a meal before going back. Before Lu Ziqin had time to reply, someone lifted the curtain of the carriage and poked his head over. Princess. Shi Niang had just called princess, but when she saw Lu Ziqin, the rest of her words were stuck in her throat and she couldn't spit them out. She looked at the two people in the carriage with her mouth half open in shock. When Lu Ziqin saw Shi Niang, he was also stunned, and then he was filled with joy, like jumping for joy. After a quick meeting in Qingcheng Temple, Lu Ziqin mobilized all his people to find Wei Ruo's whereabouts. But Wei Ruo seemed to be lost in the sea, without any information. It was so silent that Lu Ziqin even wondered if he had hallucinated that day at Qingcheng Temple. Wei Ruo turns out to be Shi Niang. This person he had heard from Xiao Yu countless times was him, not just him, but also the person the emperor had been looking for. She was hiding next to Xiao and working as a steward in Wutong Lane. It was no wonder that he couldn't find any trace of her. Ziqin lamented that he really couldn't find anything after wearing iron shoes. Lu Ziqin stabilized his mind and nodded slightly to Shi Niang. He had to explain this matter to Xiao Yu before making other plans. Gu Huayu looked at Shi Niang, then at Lu Ziqin, and looked back and forth between the two of them. She explained to Shi Niang in an apologetic manner, Sixth Master said he would give me a gift, so what? Let's sit down together, the car is back. Gu Huayu thought that Shi Niang's shocked expression was because she and Lu Ziqin were riding in the same car. In Gu Huayu's heart, Shi Niang is a person whose rules and etiquette are greater than those of heaven, rigid and strict. Gu Huayu was worried. She was afraid that Shi Niang would scold her and Lu Ziqin face to face regardless of her feelings, so that Lu Ziqin would not be able to step down. How did Gu Huayu know that Shi Niang's heart was in chaos the moment she saw Lu Ziqin? Shi Niang's mind was struggling between staying or escaping. There was no thought of etiquette and rules at all. She was worried that Lu Ziqin would recognize her. Although Lu Ziqin was young, she had already left the capital when he was born. Ziqin has never seen her, so he probably doesn't know her. But don't be afraid of 10,000, just be afraid of just in case. She was in awe of the people in Jinqiu's palace and always tried to avoid them. Shi Niang then thought about it. Lu Ziqin was right in front of her. If she ran away when she saw him, wouldn't it make people think too much? Shi Niang calmed herself down and listened to Gu Huayu with a smile on her face. She didn't hear a word of what Gu Huayu said. Seeing that Gu Huayu stopped talking, Shi Niang smiled and bowed slightly to Lu Ziqin. Hello, Mr. Six, and hello, Princess. Gu Huayu saw Shi Niang greeting Lu Ziqin politely, and felt very grateful to her. I thought to myself, yes, the Stinky Feet Fairy is quite humane, you can consider adding a big chicken drumstick to her. Lu Ziqin nodded slightly, returning Shi Niang's gift. The three of them had their own thoughts and greeted each other politely. Gu Huayu got out of the car, and Lu Ziqin got out of the car behind Gu Huayu. Shi Niang waited for Lu Ziqin to get out of the car, lowered the curtain, turned to Gu Huayu and said, Princess, please go to the kitchen to arrange for someone to serve food. Gu Huayu wished that Shi Niang would leave quickly. Okay, go and do your work. Shi Niang heard Gu Huayu's words and left as quickly as oiling her solace. Lu Ziqin looked at Shi Niang, who was leaving in a hurry, turned around and saw Gu Huayu walking up the corridor, and hurriedly followed her. He whispered to Gu Huayu, Xiao, I have something to tell you. Gu Huayu looked up at Lu Ziqin and saw his serious expression. What's wrong? Ziqin said, it's a very important thing. Gu Huayu frowned slightly and said, come to the study with me. Lu Ziqin nodded and followed Gu Huayu to the study. Entering the study, Lu Ziqin closed the door. Gu Huayu saw Lu Ziqin's cautious behavior and asked, "What's wrong?" Lu Ziqin walked to Gu Huayu and lowered his voice, "Xiao, Shi Niang is the person I have been looking for." Gu Huayu didn't react for a moment. She looked at Lu Ziqin doubtfully and pointed to the door. "What do you mean? Shi Niang? Qinjian, I don't understand what you mean." Lu Ziqin explained, "Shi Niang's real name is Wei Ruo. Wei Ruo and Wei Xian are twins, both are aunts, and they are the female officials around the queen. After the palace incident, the empress asked Wei Ruo and Wei Xian to escape from the palace with their children. Later, after the palace incident subsided, the emperor asked your father to search for the child born to his mother-in-law. When Uncle Hua found Wei Xian could only breathe. Wei Xian said that she was responsible for diverting the pursuers, and Wei Ruo left with the child. Wei Ruo was Shi Niang. Over the years, the emperor has been searching for the whereabouts of Wei Ruo and the child." Gu Huayu asked, "How do you know Shi Niang is Wei Ruo?" Lu Ziqin said firmly, "I have painted her portrait, and my grandfather has confirmed it. Xiao, I want to take her into the palace to meet the emperor. The emperor has something to ask her." The sudden news made Gu Huayu a little confused. She knew that this matter was not trivial, so she asked with some worry, "The emperor will not kill Shi Niang, right?" Lu Ziqin shook his head, "I don't know. Shi Niang is the person close to the empress, and it is her duty to protect the master. If the child born by the empress, Shi Niang is responsible for not protecting the master well." Gu Huayu nodded, "I understand." Gu Huayu thought about it. This matter was of great importance and she couldn't stop it. "I'll ask Shi Niang to come in, you talk to her. Then I will go into the palace with you. If the emperor wants Shi Niang's life, we will plead for her together." "Okay. Shi Niang has been with me for 6 years. She treats me very well. I want to save her." Lu Ziqin knew that Gu Huayu valued affection and justice, so he nodded, "Okay. If the emperor wants her life, I will plead for her with you." Seeing that Lu Ziqin agreed, Gu Huayu opened the door and went out. She told Lonisara waiting at the door, "Go and ask Shi Niang to come over." Landong bowed down and turned around to go to the kitchen. After a while, Shi Niang came over with Lonisara. Gu Huayu sent the honeysuckle away. "Princess, where are you looking for?" Shi Niang asked. Gu Huayu raised her chin towards Lu Ziqin, "I'm not looking for you, it's Mr. Lu who is looking for you." Shi Niang looked at Lu Ziqin and felt inexplicably nervous. Lu Ziqin bowed to Shi Niang and said, "Wei Shang Palace, I'm so polite to you, Lu Ziqin." Shi Niang was stunned for a moment, then smiled. Sure enough, people are always afraid of whatever comes next. Master Lu has already recognized the old slave. Lu Ziqin nodded and said, "The emperor has been looking for you these years. There is something that the emperor wants to ask Wei Shanggong personally. What is supposed to come will always come." After talking about it, Shi Niang felt calm and nodded, "I understand, this day will come sooner or later. Let's go, I will follow Mr. Lu into the palace." Shi Niang turned around and bowed deeply to Gu Huayu and said, "Thank you, Princess, for your care over the years." Gu Huayu didn't know what to say, so she just said, "I will enter the palace with you." Shi Niang thought about explaining everything to the emperor in person, so as not to involve Gu Huayu. "That's fine, let's go." As the two cars set off from Wuitong Lane, Lu Ziqin said to Gu Huayu, "Xiao, I'll go ahead and meet you at the palace gate." Gu Huayu nodded in agreement, "Okay." In the car, Gu Huayu didn't say much, and Shi Niang didn't say anything either. They walked quietly to the palace gate. Gu Huayu got out of the car first and saw Lu Ziqin and Eunuch Gao already waiting at the door. After Shi Niang got out of the car, she wanted to greet Eunuch Gao, but Eunuch Gao stopped her. There are many people talking, so there is no need to be polite. Your Majesty is waiting. Let's go in first. A group of people went to Qianqing Palace. Eunuch Gao took the three of them directly into the royal study, and the three of them saluted the emperor. The emperor sat on the dragon chair, staring at the few people who came in, and finally his eyes fell on Xi Niang. He didn't speak for a long time, and the silence in the room was frightening. Gu Huayu knelt aside, slowly moved her hand towards Lu Ziqin, and touched his hand gently. Lu Ziqin tilted his head slightly and looked at Gu Huayu. When Gu Huayu saw Lu Ziqin looking over, she moved her lips and said silently, "Is Xi Niang going to be okay?" Lu Ziqin gave her a comforting look and followed her example and replied, "Don't worry, even if the emperor wants to punish Wei Shanggong, he won't do it now, let alone with his own hands. At this moment, he is just asking some questions." Gu Huayu felt relieved. The emperor said, "Raise your head." Everyone raised their heads as told, and saw the emperor staring at Xi Niang. Xi Niang said, "This slave is guilty and please be punished by your majesty." The emperor said expressionlessly, "We will discuss the punishment later. I ask you, where is the emperor's eldest son? Where is he now?" Xi Niang leaned over and said, "I deserve death for my crime. I lost the emperor's eldest son. I have been searching for the emperor's eldest son for 20 years. I searched all over Daxing, but I still can't find the emperor's eldest son." The emperor stood up, walked to Xi Niang, and said angrily, "Lost it? How did you lose it?" Xi Niang lowered her head and replied, "On that day, the palace was in chaos. The empress entrusted the young master to the servants and Wei Xian, and asked us to take the young master out of the palace. The slave and Wei Xian took the little master all the way to avoid, and were still discovered. Behind him, the slave and Wei Zindong hid in Tibet, and finally went out of the palace from Donghua Gate. When the pursuers came out, Wei Xian asked her slaves to hold the emperor's eldest son and leave while she came to cut off the queen. The slave girl ran eastward with her little master in her arms and left the city through the east gate. Soon, the pursuers caught up with her again. In desperation, the servant put the sleeping young master into the earth temple on the roadside, hoping to lure the pursuers away and then return to hug the emperor's eldest son. But when the slave threw away the pursuers and turned back, the young master was gone. The slave has been looking for his young master everywhere, but has not found him so far. The slave deserves death for failing to protect his master. Please punish me." Gu Huayu suddenly understood why Xi Niang knelt in front of the Tutu temple to worship that day. It turned out that that was the place where the emperor's eldest son was lost. The emperor asked solemnly, "How can we find him so far? If the emperor's eldest son is still alive, he must be more than 20 years old. How can you find him?" Xi Niang leaned over and replied, "The emperor's eldest son has a big dipper mole on the sole of his right foot." As soon as Xi Niang's words came out, everyone in the room was stunned. Gu Huayu asked in surprise, "Big dipper mole?" Xi Niang nodded and said, "Yes, the Big Dipper mole." Gu Huayu looked at Lu Ziqin in shock, and Lu Ziqin looked at Xi Niang blankly. The emperor saw Gu Huayu's expression in his eyes and asked, "Have you seen Yan Ran before?" Gu Huayu pointed at Lu Ziqin and said, "Ziqin has the Big Dipper mole on his feet." Everyone looked at Lu Ziqin, and the emperor asked in disbelief, "Ziqin has a 7-star mole on his foot." The emperor's voice trembled slightly, unable to hide his nervousness. Lu Ziqin turned over and sat on the ground, took off his shoes and socks, and exposed his feet. Sure enough, there were 7 moles on the sole of his right foot. Xi Niang was so excited that she moved her knees towards Lu Ziqin, her eyes fixed on Lu Ziqin, and her lips trembled as she murmured, "Sixth master is the little master. How is it possible? Do all the children born in the Ye family have moles on the soles of their feet?" Lu Ziqin asked blankly. Eunuch Gao shook his head and said, "No, Long Live Master has the same 7-star mole on his right foot." The emperor lowered his head and took off his shoes and socks, revealing his right foot. Sure enough, the emperor's right foot had the same 7-star nevus. But before Luzikin could finish speaking, the emperor said, "Mrsya is here to see you." Eunuch Gao hurriedly left the imperial study to give instructions. Gu Huayu reminded Eunuch Gao, "Eunuch, Mrsya is at the Duke Chinquo's residence." "Thank you, princess." The emperor put on his shoes and socks and said, "Everyone, get up and sit down." The three of them thanked each other, stood up and sat on the brocade stool. The emperor looked at Shi Niang and asked, "What are your instructions?" Shi Niang leaned forward and said, "Back to the emperor, I asked my servant to the young master to Baiguan, and try to hand the young master into the hands of Miss Shan." At that time, the empress thought something unexpected had happened to the emperor. The empress said that if something happens to the emperor, the Ye family will not be spared. Miss Shan is the eldest daughter-in-law of the British Duke. Even if Prince Duan ascends to the throne, he would not dare to touch the British Duke. It must be that the Empress has a spirit in heaven, and by some strange combination of circumstances, the young master actually came to Miss Shan and grew up under her care. The Emperor asked, "Did you leave before you left?" Shi Niang wiped the corners of her eyes and choked up, "Back to the Emperor." When the Empress started to move, her lower body began to bleed. When the Empress gave birth to the young master, the Empress only had one breath left. After telling the slaves to protect the young master, she was gone. Breathed. The Emperor asked some other questions until Eunuch Gao came in and reported, "Your Majesty, Mrsya is here." The Emperor looked up at the door and said, "Please come in." Eunuch Gao exited, and after a while, Mrsya walked into the royal study. Mrsya first saluted the emperor on the dragon throne, turned around and saw Lu Zikin and Gu Huayu, and said with a smile, "Zikin and Yan Ran are here too." Gu Huayu nodded. When Mrsya's eyes fell on Shi Niang's face, she stared blankly for a while and asked, "Wei Ruo." Shi Niang stood up and bent her knees, "Miss Shan, I am a slave." Mrsya reached out and took Shi Niang's hand and asked, "Where have you been these years? Why don't you come back to the capital? Where is the emperor's eldest son? Is he okay?" Eunuch Gao said, "Madam, please sit down first. The emperor has something to ask you." Mrsya let go of her hand, bowed to the emperor and said, "I have lost my temper, please forgive me." The emperor said, "Madam, please sit down." Mrsya thanked her and sat down. "Your Majesty, I would like to ask you a question. I will tell you everything I know." The emperor nodded and said straight to the point, "Where did Madam pick up Zikin?" Madame Ye looked at the emperor in astonishment. After a long moment, her lips moved and said, "Your Majesty, how did you know that Zikin was picked up by his wife?" End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the Lucky Girl from a Farm Family. Author, He Would Fire Every. Chapter 282. Chapter 282 King Qin. When Mrsya said this, she suddenly realized something and turned to look at Lu Zikin and then at the emperor. Mrsya's eyes turned back and forth between the emperor and Lu Zikin several times, and she said in disbelief, "Could it be that Zikin is the eldest son of the emperor?" Eunuch Gao reminded, "Madam, you haven't replied to the emperor yet." "Well, back then, my wife returned to the capital from the border gate. She was supposed to enter the city through the north gate, but due to the palace incident, the north gate was prohibited from entering and exiting. The wife had no choice but to go around the east gate. When she passed the Tutu temple not far from the east gate, she heard the cry of a baby. The minister's wife took the child back and told the government that it was the child of the minister's wife and that Zikin was very small. The minister's wife said that Zikin was premature and gave Zikin's birthday as April 26. Eunuch Gao wiped his tears and said, that's right, Mr. Lu is the eldest son of the emperor." Shi Niang knelt down on the ground with tears in her eyes, it must be the presence of the Empress that allowed the young master to meet Miss Shan. The Emperor also had tears in his eyes. He turned his head and wiped his face, then turned to Lu Zikin and said, "Zikin, why don't you kneel down and thank your aunt for her kindness in raising you?" Lu Zikin stood up and turned to Mrsya, knelt down and said, "Thank you, mother, thank you, aunt, for your kindness in raising me." The name aunt made Mrsya have mixed emotions. Mrsya felt a little disappointed when she suddenly called her aunt after calling her mother's son for more than 20 years, even though this person was the eldest son of the emperor and her relative. Mrsya stretched out her hand to help Lu Zikin up, and looked at the majestic man in front of her. There was a sister's agility in her brows, and he seemed to have the heroic aura of an emperor. Lu Zikin met Mrsya's gaze and saw the reluctance and loss in her heart. He said warmly, "Aunt, don't be sad. Aunt is Zikin's aunt and Zikin's mother. For Zikin, both generating kindness and cultivating kindness are equally important. No matter what the son's status is, in the son's heart, the mother is always the mother." The son thanks his mother for his upbringing. Mrsya's eyes became astringent for a while, and she felt extremely happy and relieved. She stretched out her arms to hug her son, who was much taller than herself. "You're welcome, this is our fate. From the day your aunt brings you back to her home, she will treat you as her own son. Auntie has no other requirements. Like many mothers in the world, she only hopes that you will grow up healthily and be safe. Auntie is not sad, she is happy. Over the years, the emperor has been concerned about you and has been looking for you for many years. Please pay respect to the emperor quickly." Speaking, Mrsya loosened her hands and pushed Lu Zikin towards the emperor. Lu Zikin turned around to look at the emperor, lifted up his clothes and knelt down to salute, choking with sobs and saying, your Majesty is here, and I, my son, please bow to your Majesty." Lu Zikin lay on the ground, his eyes blurred by tears, thinking not only of the emperor's preference for him over the years, but also of all the things the emperor had done to find him. For more than 20 years, his missing presence has become the emperor's weakness. In his more than 20 years of life, his misfortune was that his mother passed away when he was born, and he has lived in a place like the British Crown Palace until now. He was lucky again. His lucky aunt gave him motherly love, and the Duke Chinquo's family gave him a warm home. As for the father, even when he didn't know that he was his biological son, he gave her a level of care comparable to that of a father. The emperor got up from the dragon chair, walked slowly to Lu Zikin, bent down and helped Lu Zikin up. The father and son looked at each other, smiling at each other with tears in their eyes. The emperor was very excited. After many years, he still clearly remembered that Yeshangsha brought Zikin into the palace. When he saw Zikin for the first time, his heart skipped a beat. He felt an unprecedented intimacy from this child. This feeling made him like him very much, and he couldn't help but want to be good to him. This is the blood relationship that is innate and uninterrupted. After a moment, the emperor patted Lu Zikin on the shoulder and said, although I am a God-given person, God has treated me well and allowed you to grow up where I can see you. Lu Zikin leaned forward and said, thank you, father, for your care. Eunuch Gao wiped the corners of his eyes, bowed to the emperor and said, congratulations to the emperor, congratulations to the emperor. This is a great event. The emperor has found his eldest son. Emperor Longian was overjoyed and said, this is indeed a great joy, and the whole world should celebrate it. I pass down the order that all my subjects who are greatly promoted can receive 2 kilograms of grain and 2 taels of silver based on their household registration. Those present immediately knelt down to give thanks. The emperor said to Mr. Gao impartially, let someone come in and draw up the decree. Eunuch Gao bowed down and left the house. The emperor said to Lu Zikin, Zikin, your life experience has been revealed. It is no longer suitable to live in the British Duke's mansion or the Chinquo Duke's mansion. I was once the king of Qin, and I made you the king of Qin. Can you live in the Prince of Qin's mansion? Lu Zikan knelt down to thank him. The emperor said, then it's settled. You will live in the Prince of Qin's mansion first. When the Qin Tianjian chooses a date, I will take you to the Taimiao temple. Your name has always been in the ancestral genealogy, called Zhou Jinghong. Today's Zikan is the same as Qinjian same, use it as a word. Lu Zikan said, okay, I will obey my father's arrangements. The emperor looked at Qi Niang and said, I will punish you to live in the Prince of Qin's mansion. From now on, you can serve Zikan well and help him take care of the Prince of Qin's mansion. As soon as Gu Huayu heard that Qi Niang was leaving, she said first, Qi Niang, what will happen to my princess's mansion when you leave? The emperor looked at Gu Huayu and said, little girl, sooner or later you will not marry into Prince Qin's palace. I asked Wei Ruo to help you manage the palace earlier, why don't you thank me? Being teased by the emperor, Gu Huayu blushed with embarrassment, and everyone else laughed. Qi Niang knelt down to thank her. Seeing Gu Huayu standing stunned, she pulled her and asked her to kneel down and thank her. The tense atmosphere in the room suddenly relaxed when the emperor teased him. When the officials from the Hanlin Academy came in, Mrsye took Gu Huayu and bowed before leaving. The emperor said, you go back first and wait to receive the order. King Qin stays here. I have something to say to you. Mrsye, Qi Niang, and Gu Huayu exited the imperial study. Eunuch Gao stopped Qi Niang, Wei Ruo, wait a minute. Qi Niang stopped. Mrsye said to Qi Niang, we are going back first, and you can come and sit in the house after settling down. Qi Niang bent her knees and said, thank you, Miss Shan. Once the servants are settled, I will go to the mansion to apologize to the old lady. Mrsye said, there is no need to apologize. Come over and talk to my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law often talks about you. Qi Niang bent her knees and bowed in response. Mrsye and Gu Huayu walked out of the Qianqing palace side by side. Because Mrsye was still ill, they were carried to the entrance of the Qianqing palace in a soft sedan chair. Mrsye glanced at the soft sedan waiting by the side and said to Gu Huayu, Yan Ran, thank you, I'll go first. Gu Hua said goodbye to Mrsye Fu Shen, okay, I will come over to the house tomorrow to perform acupuncture on you. When Gu Huayu talked about the acupuncture, Mrsye suddenly thought of what she had not finished asking in the morning, stopped and asked, Yan Ran, you said the poison in my body has been there for many years. Gu Huayu nodded, yes, the poison in Madame's body is more than 20 years old. Mrsye then asked, Yan Ran, what kind of poison did I get? Gu Huayu said, the poison that Madame was poisoned was not just a single poison. It was prepared with several strange poisons from the western regions. This poison has the effect of Jueze, but it is more sinister than Jueze. If Madame is lucky enough to be pregnant, will also die due to bleeding during childbirth. Speaking of this, Gu Huayu suddenly thought of the cause of the queen's death, and wondered to herself, could the queen have been poisoned by the same poison? After hearing Gu Huayu's words, Mrsye was so angry that she cursed, vicious old witch, I cursed her with a bad death. Gu Huayu advised, Madam, calm down, anger will harm your body. Madame's body is weak and she needs a good rest. Mrsye thought that Mrs had poisoned her because she could not have children. She was so angry that she wanted to tear her apart. How could she calm down? Yan Ran, you don't know, I have always dreamed of having a child. Before Mrsye finished speaking, her eyes turned black and she immediately fell to one side. Gu Huayu quickly stretched out her hand to support Mrsye, and called to the palace attendant beside her, come here and help. The palace people immediately went to court to support Mrsye. Gu Huayu took the opportunity to check Mrsye's pulse and found out that her blood was attacking her heart and there was nothing serious. So he said to the palace attendant, help madam get into the sedan chair. Marcia sat on the soft sedan chair, and she woke up. What's wrong with me? Seeing Marcia wake up, Gu Huayu said, Madam just fainted. Madam is very weak now. Please remember to have emotional fluctuations such as joy, sorrow, and anger. Marcia nodded to Gu Huayu, thank you Yan Ran, I'll take note of it. Gu Huayu squeezed Marcia's hand and said comfortingly, Madam likes children. I will definitely try my best to make her body able to give birth to children. Marcia's eyes suddenly filled with light. She sat up and looked directly at Gu Huayu, really? Yan Ran, can I really have a child? I am already 43 this year. Can I still have a child? Gu Huayu nodded and said, believe me, Madam can do it, provided that Madam has a good life and good health. Marcia nodded repeatedly and promised, okay, Yan Ran, I will do whatever you say. Gu Huayu explained, I will give Madam one pill in the morning and one in the evening. Madam must take it on time. I will give Madam a few more injections to remove the poison from her body. I will give Madam some nourishing pills later medicine, Madam's body can be restored. Marcia bowed gratefully and said, Yan Ran, thank you. Gu Huayu smiled and said, Madam, go back and have a good rest. I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, let's see you tomorrow, Marcia said. After seeing Marcia off, Gu Huayu walked towards the palace gate. King Zhu was sitting at the table near the door of the tea house. When he saw Gu Huayu coming out, he said to Wang Qin, Princess, come out. Wang Qin returned home and heard that Lu Ziqan and Gu Huayu had brought Qi Niang into the palace. She immediately realized that the matter was not simple and rushed over. In their minds, Qi Niang was a person with a story. If Gu Huayu hadn't stopped her, they would have found out Qi Niang's background a long time ago. Wang Qin looked at the palace entrance and immediately stood up to greet him. Princess, what happened, where is Qi Niang? Gu Huayu looked around and saw many people looking this way, so she said, Aunt Wang is here too? It's okay. Let's get in the car first. Junzheng asked, Princess, do you need to wait for Mr. Lu? Gu Huayu shook her head, no, let's go back first. King Zhu put up the footstool and Wang Qin stepped forward to lift the car curtain. He waited for Gu Huayu to get in the car and then followed him. Gu Huayu waited for Wang Qin to sit down, and then roughly told the whole story. After hearing this, Wang Qin's eyes widened in shock, so, Mr. Lu is the eldest son of the emperor, born to the empress. Even at this moment, Gu Huayu couldn't calm down for a long time. She nodded and said, yes, the sixth master is the child born to the queen. Wang Qin sighed endlessly, and finally said, based on my intuition, I only knew that Qi Niang was a storyteller. I never expected that Qi Niang was actually someone close to the queen. Gu Huayu said, who says it's not the case? Who would have thought that the lunatic who stole men's shoes on the streets of Shishan was once a female official of the queen's side? Wang Qin sighed and said, it turns out that she who pretended to be crazy and acted like a fool stole the shoes to find the eldest son of the emperor. It was also difficult for her. Gu Huayu thought about Husan and the others beating Qi Niang, it's really difficult for her. Wang Qin said, sixth master is the eldest son of the emperor. Once this news comes out, the capital will probably explode. Gu Huayu leaned against the car and looked out through the window. She was silent for a moment and said, it's not just a matter of explosion. Some people may be in a hurry. Wang Qin nodded and said, that's because the emperor originally favored Mr. Lu. Good guy, now it's better. Mr. Lu is actually the eldest son of the emperor. The emperor also directly named Mr. Lu as the king of Qin. How obvious is this? This made King Qi, how can a wise king be so willing? Gu Huayu doesn't understand the matters in the court, so he can only rely on Lu Ziqan himself. Gu Huayu withdrew her gaze and looked sideways at Aunt Wang, Mother, she has gone to Prince Jin's mansion to take charge. The affairs of our mansion must be left in your hands, Aunt Wang. Aunt Wang responded cheerfully, this is a trivial matter. I'm here for you, so the princess doesn't have to worry about it. Gu Huayu nodded and said, the weather has cooled down, and it's cold in Zhuangzi. I have to go and bring my grandmother and the others back to the city. These days I have to go to the Qingqiu Palace to give Mrs. acupuncture, and I can't leave for a while. You go for me one trip. Uncle and the others live in the house over Minjiu Pavilion, and the rest of us live in Wutong Lane. When the old house is completed, we will live in the old house, and Wutong Lane will be left to the second and third brothers. Aunt Wang nodded in agreement. Don't worry, Princess, I'll make arrangements later. At Qingqiu Palace, Mrs. Jean was sitting in the Qingfang Hall, holding Buddhist beads in her hand, but she was paying attention to the movement outside the window. Mrs. Jian sat next to Mrs. Jean and said to Yemingjin, who was walking around in the room, Sister Jin, can you sit quietly for a while? Yemingjin sighed and walked to the other side of Mrs. Jean and asked, Grandma, why did the emperor summon my aunt to the palace? My aunt just woke up today, her face is as white as paper, and she has to be walked around. What is it? What urgent matter does the emperor want to summon my aunt to the palace right now? Yemingjin has been attached to his aunt Yeshan since he was a child, and Yeshan and other aunts are also extremely fond of Yemingjin. Yeshan fell ill, and Yemingjin was worried. Old madam, the second master sent someone back to deliver a message, telling old madam not to worry, my aunt has left the palace and will return to the house later. The concierge's wife came in quickly to report. Mrs. Jean stood up and said, I'll go take a look. Mrs. Jean took Mrs. Jian to the second gate. After waiting for a while, she didn't see Yeshan's car coming in. She was about to send someone to take a look when she saw Yemingjin walking over quickly. End of this chapter. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 283. Chapter 283. The eldest son of the emperor. Yemingjin was the first to ask, second brother, where is my aunt? Why isn't my aunt with you? Yemingjin cupped his hands towards Mrs. Jean and Mrs. Jian and said, Grandma, I'm a little tired and will rest in the outer courtyard. Grandma, Anyang, this is a big deal. Qingjian was not born to the eldest aunt, but to the younger aunt, the eldest son of the emperor, born to the empress. The emperor summoned Aunt Zhe into the palace to confirm this matter. The aunt said, let grandma and grandma make preparations. The emperor's imperial edict will arrive in a while, so everyone should prepare to receive it. Yemingjin is a slow-tempered person. When big things come to him, he will deal with them slowly and calmly. The people present were petrified on the spot after hearing Yemingjin's words. They looked at Yemingjin blankly and couldn't recover for a long time. Yemingjin saw everyone looking at him blankly and said, I was shocked when I heard what my aunt said just now. Although I don't understand why Zikin is not my aunt's child but my sister's child, this matter is very important to our family. It's also a happy event. Mrs. Jean came to her senses, shook off Mrs. Jian's hand, and walked out. I'll go ask Sister Shan what's going on. Mrs. Jian hurriedly said, Brother Qin, hold on to Grandma. After saying that, Mrs. Jian turned around and ordered the maid next to her, go and take my official uniform from the old lady and bring it to the outer courtyard. The maid received the order and turned around to get her official uniform. Mrs. Jean went to the outer courtyard to see Mrs. Ye and asked, Sister Shan, why did Zikin become Ye's child? Mrs. Ye started from when Lu Zikin sent Gu Huayu back to Wutong Lane and met Wei Ruo in Wutong Lane, until she picked up Lu Zikin at Tutu Temple. As soon as Madame Ye finished explaining the matter, a servant came to report, "Old Madam, Madam, the imperial edict has arrived, and we are ready to receive it." MRSGN ordered, "Set up the incense case, open the middle door, and prepare to receive the order." The maidservant and mother-in-law hurriedly served MRSGN while MRSGN changed her clothes. Subsequently, MRSGN led Duke Chinquo up and down on his knees to receive the imperial edict. Because MRSye was instrumental in saving the emperor's eldest son, the emperor granted MRSye the title of first-grade imperial concubine and rewarded her with thousands of taels of gold, silk, jade, and precious stones. The Duke of Chinquo will be rewarded with 1,000 taels of gold for his meritorious service in protecting the emperor's eldest son. Appointed Ye Minghao as the chief historian of the Prince of Qin's palace and took office immediately. At the same time, the British government also received an imperial edict, thanking the British government for raising the eldest son of the emperor, and rewarded him with 1,000 taels of gold. The British Duke's family received the imperial edict. If they received a bolt from the blue, everyone was stunned. The British Duke even forgot to get up to receive the edict. Send off the chamberlain who announced the decree. The British Duke, M.R.S. Yang, Lu Dingning, M.R.S. Li, and Lu Zixun gathered together in the main hall for a rare occasion. Lu Dingning said in disbelief, "Isn't Zixun the sister-in-law's child? How did he become the eldest son of the emperor?" Lu Zixun pouted and said, "It's good now. The prince has been planning something for many years, and it seems that it will fail miserably." M.R.S. Yang looked at the British Duke and sneered, "How about the Duke still counting on that villain to help the prince? Is the result satisfactory to the Duke?" The British Duke glanced sideways at M.R.S. Yang, stood up, and said, "I'm going to see the prince to discuss matters." M.R.S. Yang asked angrily, "Which prince are you looking for? King Qin or the wise king?" The British Duke ignored Old Man Yang and turned around to open the door. Lu Dingning looked at M.R.S. Yang and said, "My father would feel uncomfortable if something like this happened. Why would my mother bother to ridicule my father? Taunting him? He deserves it," the old lady said coldly. "If he had listened to her, would he have survived to this day?" Lu Zixun took over the words, "Grandma is right, Grandpa just asked for it. However, the eldest aunt is too timid. She picked up a child and came back as his legitimate son, and deceived us for more than 20 years. That's it?" Li Shi sneered and said, "No, what else can be done? What Ye picked up was a dragon species, the eldest son of the emperor. The emperor directly named him King of Qin. Do you know what King Qin means?" "What does it mean?" Lu Zixun asked in confusion. Li Shi looked at Lu Zixun and said angrily, "The emperor was the king of Qin before he ascended the throne. What do you think it means?" Lu Zixun looked at M.R.S. Li and said, "What do you mean, the emperor intends to pass the throne to King Qin? Then aren't the work of the prince and the empress in vain?" Lu Dingning lowered his head and took a sip of tea, then raised his head and said, "Don't talk nonsense, what do you know? The country, the country, the country, is related to all aspects. Are you making arrogant comments?" Ms. Li glanced at Lu Dingning, raised the corners of her mouth, smiled contemptuously, lowered her head and stopped talking. Lu Zixun retorted, "Is this a false comment? After all, Lu Zixun has also been living in the British government for more than 20 years. We have raised him, so we can't talk about him anymore." M.R.S. Yang couldn't see that Li and Lu Zixun were targeting Lu Zixun. She lowered her face and said to Lu Zixun, "There is no ethics at all. Who taught you to talk to your father like this? You have children under your knees, and you still have such no rules in what you say and do." Lu Zixun lowered his head and did not dare to answer any more words. The atmosphere in the room was tense. Lu Dingning smiled awkwardly, stood up and leaned towards M.R.S. Yang and said, "Mom, my son has an appointment, so he won't be at home for dinner." Seeing that Lu Dingning was about to leave, Lu Zixun also stood up and said, "Grandma, my grandson also made an appointment." Li called Lu Zixun to stop and wanted him to stop fooling around. Before Mr. Li could say anything, Mr. Yang said, "In a man's family, socializing outside is indispensable. Zixun is already an adult. You don't need to tie Zixun too tightly." Ms. Li was dissatisfied, lowered her head and said nothing. Old Mrs. Yang looked at Mrs. Li and said to Grandma Wang, "Let's go back to." Mrs. Yang returned to Rong'an Hall. Grandma Wang sent the servants out and asked, "Old Madam, let's." Old Madam Yang glanced sideways at Grandma Wang and said angrily, "Why are you panicking? Sixth Master is now the king of Qin. Will he investigate those things? I am worried." Mrs. Yang glared at Grandma Wang and said, "Look at you, you have no future at all. How many years have passed since those things happened? The people are all dead, what can he find? What do you have to worry about?" Mother Wang was not at ease after hearing what Mrs. Yang said. "What I am worried about is not the past, I am worried about the eldest lady. When the eldest lady gets better, she will definitely investigate." Mrs. Yang frowned slightly and said after a moment of silence, "Even if Dr. Who detects the poison, she has no evidence to prove that we did it." "But," Mrs. Yang said impatiently, "Okay, don't wait, let's go see if dinner is ready, and ask the kitchen to add a few more dishes. I got a reward from the emperor today, so I should improve the food for everyone." Grandma Wang bowed her knees and left the room. The British Duke came out of the palace and took Du Bin to the Xianwang mansion by car. The wise king received the report from his servants and immediately went to the palace to find concubine to make up his mind. The British Duke failed and turned around to look for the king in Zhongsha province. The king received the emperor's summons and also went to the palace, but the British Duke was once again in vain. Du Bin asked, "Master Guo, where should we go next?" "Back to our hometown." The British Duke didn't want to go back home, so he shook his head and said, "Let's go to the tea house for a meeting." Du Binqian persuaded, "My lord, there are many people in the tea house talking about different things. I am afraid that this matter has already spread in the tea house." The British council came over and said helplessly, "Go back home." Just as Du Bin was about to instruct the driver to drive the carriage, a waiter wearing the clothes of Jingbo Tea House came over and said, "Master Guo, our boss has a treat." Du Bin looked at the British Duke, "Your Majesty." The British Duke looked at the waiter and said, "Lead the way." The waiter took the British businessman to Jingbo Tea House and went straight to the second floor. Du Bin wanted to follow, but was stopped by someone. The British Duke ordered, "Just wait downstairs." Du Bin bowed down and watched the British Duke disappear around the corner of the stairs. One after another imperial edicts were sent out from the Qianqing Palace, and the capital was boiling with the edicts being sent out one after another. After King Qi, Li Chang, and Li Tao had lunch at Huixian Tower, the three of them stood in front of the window and looked at Dichang Bank and talked. "Li Chendao, Dichang Bank is the property of Princess Yan Ran. Princess Yan Ran's adoptive father is Gu Dichang, and the bank is named after Mr. Gu." "Wow," King Qi shook his folding fan and said with a smile, "Hua Yan Ran is like a mystery, making me more and more curious." Li Chang smiled and said, "The princess is indeed very mysterious. I have seen her several times, and every time, the princess is different. It is really hard to see through." "Is there anything you can't see through? I've met Xiao many times, she's always straightforward, without twists and turns, and she's very sincere to people." Before Li Tao finished speaking, there was a knock on the door. The three of them turned to look at the door, and King Qi said, "Come in." Sun Ning pushed the door open and reported in a panic, "Sir, something big has happened." King Qi put away his folding fan, frowned and asked, "Why are you so flustered?" Sun Ning leaned forward and said, "I just received a tip. Master Lulu and Princess Yan Ran brought a woman into the palace." Eunuch Gao personally went to the palace gate to welcome the woman in. Not long after these three people entered, someone from the emperor's side came by the way. People went to Qingqiu Palace to bring Mrsya into the palace. King Qi frowned even more and asked, "Have you found out? What are Lulu and Yan Ran doing in the palace?" Sun Ning shook his head and said, "Master, our people can't enter the Qianqing Palace. We don't know what happened in the Qianqing Palace." King Qi turned his hands behind his back twice and said, "Let's go explore again and see why they entered the palace." Sun Ning bowed down and exited the door. After Sun Ning left, King Qi circled around the room. After 2 circles, he looked up at Li Cheng and said, "Brother Cheng, do you think Lulu went to the palace to ask his father to grant him a marriage?" Li Cheng shook his head, "I don't know." Li Tao said, "Impossible." "Why is it impossible?" King Qi asked. "Yes, why is it impossible?" Li Cheng asked. "Xiao said that her revenge has not been avenged and she will not talk about marriage." King Qi and Li Cheng looked at each other quickly. The great revenge has not been avenged. Yan Ran is investigating the Hua family's case. Li Tao nodded. Seeing the expressions of King Qi and his brother, he suddenly realized that he had talked too much. King Qi then asked, "Do you know what progress has been made on Yan Ran's side?" Li Tao shook his head and said, "Back to the prince, I only know that Xiao is checking, but I don't know her progress." King Qi still wanted to ask questions, but he saw Wei Tian pushing the door open and saying hurriedly, "Sir, something big has happened. The Qianqing Palace has issued many imperial edicts one after another." "Imperial edict? What edict? To whom is it given?" Wei Tian replied, "It's for the Duke of Qingqiu, the Duke of England, Mrsya, the Ministry of Husbandry, the Ministry of Rights, the Ministry of Personnel, the Ministry of Industry, and also for the Qintian supervisor." Li Cheng asked solemnly, "What happened? Why did the emperor issue so many imperial edicts?" Wei Tian said, "It is said that we have found the eldest son of the emperor who was born to the queen." "What?" the 3 people in the room exclaimed. Wei Tian told everyone what he had found out. After hearing this, King Qi said to Li Cheng and Li Tao, "You two go back first, and I will go into the palace to see my mother and concubine." Li Cheng nodded, "Your Majesty, go quickly and don't worry about us." The king of Qi immediately left the house, got in the car and went straight to the palace. In the imperial study room, the emperor explained everything that came to his mind one by one, and said, "Do as I arranged first. Whatever is needed later, I will make up for it when the time comes." Eunuch Gao bowed and said, "Old slave, I understand." The emperor turned to look at Zikin and said, "Zikin is coming with me." Zikin bowed and said, "Okay." The emperor led Zikin to the side hall, which is where the emperor usually rests. The emperor sat down on the dragon couch, pointed to the brocade stool beside him, and motioned for Zikin to sit down. After Zikin thanked him for his kindness, he sat down on the brocade stool. The emperor raised his hand and poured a cup of tea for Zikin. Zikin was so frightened that he leaned over again and again, "Father, you can't help me." The emperor smiled and said, "I am not a tiger, we are father and son, you don't have to be so reserved. How we, father and son, got along in the past, how we will get along in the future." Zikin bowed and thanked him and said, "My son, I have written it down." The emperor picked up the teacup and sipped the tea, and then said, "Although no one has lived in the Qin prince's mansion for more than 20 years, there are always guards and people clean it regularly, and the house is repaired every year. Occasionally, I will go there. Sit down. I have given an order to the Ministry of Works. Over there, someone should go over to check it out by now, and you can move in directly." Zikin felt warm in his heart as he watched the emperor explain everything in detail, just like how his uncle and aunt usually told Ming how to be diligent. "Thank you, father, I understand." The emperor continued, over at Prince Jin's mansion, Wei Ruo will be watching over you, so you can rest assured. If Wei is someone close to your mother and is extremely loyal, you can feel free to use her. I will let Lai Shun and Lai Wang come over and listen to your orders. Lai Shun and Lai Wang were both trained by Gao Lin, and they are very careful in their work. With Ryuan Rugjuan and others around you, you should have enough people to handle them. I asked Ming Hao to go to the palace to write a long history for you. You are cousins, so Ming Hao will naturally plan everything for you. Furthermore, I asked Ruan Chu, the third son of General Wei Yiwen, to be the commander of the guards of the Qin Palace. Ruan Chu was very skilled and was the #1 scholar in the last martial arts examination. Wei Yiwen General Ruan Jinsong is my good friend. Back then, Jinsong and Hualing and I were the best friends. When the three of us got together, we always had endless things to say. Ruan Chu is now the deputy commander of the Jiangyi camp. I wonder if you are familiar with him. Lu Zikan said, back to my father, I have spent a lot of time traveling abroad in recent years and have not had much contact with the children of the aristocratic families in the capital. I have heard of Ruan Chu, but I am not familiar with him. End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 284. Chapter 284 King Qin. The emperor said, Ruan Chu's mother, Mrs. Su, is with the army at the border. Mrs. Su and Jinsong are loving husband and wife, and Mrs. Su gave birth to 2 sons and 1 daughter to Jinsong. Ruan Chu is the third eldest. Ruan Chu has an elder brother and an elder sister. His elder brother, Ruan Tong, followed General Wei Yiwen at the border. Ruan Tong took the daughter of a deputy general in Jinsong as his wife. Sister Ruan Xiaochen married Fang Qingyuan, the eldest son of Yashi Taifang Zhenzhong. This is the basic situation of the Ruan family. Jinsong, like Dinkan, both returned to Beijing this year to report on their work. They are both on their way back to Beijing now and will probably arrive in the capital early next month. Privy Councillor Huang handed over the beggar's bones and wanted to retire and return to his hometown. I plan to fulfill Privy Wang's wish and grant him permission, so that Jinsong can fill Privy Wang's vacancy. Zikan did not expect that his father would say this to him. He felt a little uneasy and even frightened. He leaned forward and said, "Thank you, father, for telling me. I understand." The emperor also realized that he had said too much, so he changed the subject and asked, "When will your marriage to Yanran be decided?" Zikan felt relieved when he saw that his father did not continue the previous topic. When his father mentioned marriage, he felt like he was being urged to get married. Zikan shook his head and said, "Go back to the emperor. Yanran wants to find out what happened to the Hua family back then, and avenge Uncle Hua and the others before considering marriage. My son, I respect Yanran's wishes. When she finds out the truth, we will ask the emperor for marriage." The old affairs of the Hua family were brought up again, and the emperor sighed guiltily and said, "It's time to investigate this matter. After I take you to the ancestral temple to worship and perform the canonization ceremony, you will go to the Ministry of Punishment to take up a post, so that you can investigate the events of that year." After the incident occurred, the Hua family immediately set out to investigate. At that time, I received a threatening letter from the other party. The other party used you as a bargaining chip and asked me to stop the Hua family from continuing to pursue this matter. For your safety, I had no choice but to ask Gao Lin to go to Jiangnan and ask Mr. Hua to stop pursuing this matter. Zikan did not expect that it was because of him that the Hua family stopped investigating the truth. He has the responsibility and obligation to find out the truth of the matter, both publicly and privately. Zikan leaned forward and said, "My son, I would like to thank my father for your success. Your Majesty, the 3 ministers and the 6 ministers have arrived." Eunuch Gao came over to report. Zikan thought that the emperor was going to discuss state affairs and wanted to get up and leave. The emperor spoke first and said, "Follow me to meet these mainstays of the imperial court." "Okay, thank you, Father Zikin." Suddenly realized that the emperor was going to introduce him to everyone. He felt grateful again, got up, and went to the imperial study room. That day, the emperor kept Zikin in the palace. It happened to be the second day, October 21st, which was a holiday. There was no need to go to court in the morning, so the father and son talked until it was time for them to go to bed. The Kintian prison chooses the date overnight, and the most recent auspicious day is October 22nd. It is a good day with good weather, good time, good location, good luck, and good luck for everyone. After the emperor heard this, Long Yan was overjoyed, cancelled the morning court meeting, and went to the ancestral temple to worship with the ministers of civil and military affairs. After returning from the ancestral temple, the emperor directly held the canonization ceremony of King Qin. On the same day, officials from the Ministry of Rites sent the King of Qin to the Prince of Qin's mansion, and the ceremony was completed. The King of Qin sent the officials of the Ministry of Rites to the gate of the mansion. After watching the people leave, he turned around and walked into the mansion. As King Qin walked, he said to Rugjuan, "Send a message to Longzi to ask our Yuan to come back." Rugjuan bowed and said, "Okay, what about Kinglan? Should Kinglan stay in the capital or return to Longzi?" King Qin thought for a while and said, "Now is the time to employ people, so Kinglan should also stay." He came over and said, "Your Majesty, dinner is ready. Do you want to pass on the food?" King Qin looked up at the sky and said, "It's still early, I'll pick up the princess and wait for the princess to arrive before serving food. Tell Shi Niang that the Lord is coming. Today, I moved in the first day, let the kitchen cook more dishes, and everyone gathered together to have a meal. Come and retreat." Ru Yan drove over, and when King Qin was about to get on the carriage, Ruan Chu came over and asked, "Your Majesty, are you going out?" King Qin nodded, "Yes, I'll go to Wutong Lane and be back in a while." Ruan Chu said, "Okay, I'll send someone to follow." King Qin said, "No need, just send me there like a horse." Ruan Chu insisted, "How can that be done? The prince's safety is very important, and someone must follow him when he travels." King Qin frowned and asked, "How many guards should I follow when I travel?" Ruan Chu leaned over and said, "Back to the prince, when the prince goes out, he needs to be accompanied by 1 chamberlain, 4 servants, 2 maids, and 8 guards. There's no need to mobilize troops like this, right?" King Qin said. Ruan Chu said, "This is not called recruiting troops. The prince has a distinguished status and cannot allow any mistakes. Safety is the first priority. Therefore, it is basic and indispensable to have guards accompanying you." The King of Qin was puzzled and said, "King Qi, King Xian, and others did not have such a big battle when they went out." Ruan Chu leaned over and said, "I don't understand this either. Eunuch Gao told me this, it was the emperor's intention." The King of Qin was in trouble. He knew that Gu Huayu didn't like to be followed when he went out. So he asked, "Can I change it to a secret guard?" From the King of Qin's point of view, it doesn't matter whether it is an open guard or a secret guard. Their goal is the same, which is to be responsible for the safety of their master. Since the clear and dark guards are the same, replace the clear and dark guards with the dark guards. Ruan Chu shook his head and said sternly, "The dark guard is the dark guard, and the bright guard is the bright guard. Each of them has its own purpose and does its own thing." King Qin looked at Ruan Chu and asked, "What do you mean, in addition to these open guards, there must be secret guards following?" Ruan Chu nodded and said, "Yes, in addition to the 8 clear guards, there are also 8 secret guards following." Rugjuan was speechless when he heard this. "My dear, when our prince goes out, he won't be surrounded by a bunch of people." Ruan Chu said, "There are reasons why the emperor made such arrangements. The prince must not let down the emperor's wishes. Then again, Be careful to make a 10,000-year ship. Don't be afraid of 10,000, just be afraid of what happens. Rugjuan nodded and said, General Ruan is right. How could King Qin not know this truth? But Xiao usually goes out and wishes she could be alone. If Xiao saw him surrounded by people today, would she not come to the palace with him? Today is the first day that he has lived in the royal palace. This palace will be his home from now on. Xiao is the person he recognizes as the mistress of this family. From the moment he met her, he hoped that she would be involved in the important moments of his life. In his twilight years, when he looked back on the past, they would cherish every moment of each other. King Qin said, Today the Ming Guard rests. I will take Ru Xian and Ru Shi to accompany me, and let 8 secret guards follow. For now, I won't let you be in trouble in the future. How about that? Ruan Chu thought for a while and said, If the prince does not want to be too ostentatious, then I will change the 8 bright guards to secret guards and let them set up defenses along the road first. This is a compromise. King Qin nodded, Okay, then it's time to work. Ruan Chu leaned forward and said, Your Majesty, you are serious. It is our duty to protect your safety. I will make arrangements right now. Your Majesty can set off in a quarter of an hour. King Qin said, Go. Ruan Chu took 2 steps back and turned to leave. Rugjuan looked at Ruan Chu's back and said, From now on, the prince can no longer go out with an entourage. The happiness of ordinary people is gone forever. From now on, the young prince will live a life of fakeness and power. What a beautiful day. King Qin glanced at Rugjuan, who was gloating about his misfortune, and said, You go and write a letter to Ruan first, and I'll change my clothes. Rugjuan leaned forward and said, Okay, then he quickly slipped away. A quarter of an hour later, the king of Qin got into the carriage. Rugjuan and Rua sat on the horizontal board at the front of the carriage. Rua drove the carriage out of the Prince of Qin's mansion and headed towards Wuitong. The Prince of Qin's mansion is on the east side of the palace. 1 street away from the palace is Donghua Gate. It is the closest palace to the palace. It is only 2 streets away from the Hua family's old residence on Yongchun Road and 4 streets away from Wuitong Lane. At this time, Gu Huayu saw Qingzu Jiao Sui brother squatting on his horse in the yard. Qingyu came over and whispered, Princess, the prince is here. He is outside the door. Gu Huayu didn't react for a moment and asked, Your Majesty. Hearing the word Wanjai, Gu Huayu thought it was the king of Qi, and felt unhappy and frowned slightly. King Yu nodded and said, King Qin. As soon as Gu Huayu heard about King Qin, the unhappiness in her heart instantly dissipated. She immediately smiled and walked out. As she walked, she said, Tell grandma that I have something to do when I go out. You don't have to wait for me for dinner. Qingyu secretly thought that if anyone could change his face quickly, it must be the princess. Qingyu raised his voice and reminded him with disdain, Princess, you are at the side door, go out from the side door. Gu Huayu turned around and made an O gesture to Qingyu, and then went to the side door. Gu Huayu walked out of the side door and saw a large carriage parked under a tree across the street, with Rugjuan and Ruyi standing beside it. Gu Huayu walked over quickly and excitedly. She hadn't seen him for 2 days, but she felt like she hadn't seen him for several years. She was eager to appear in front of him immediately. The king of Qin in the car, through the curtains of the blinds, saw a man as cheerful as a bird walking towards him. His eyes were a little more tender, and the corners of his mouth could not help but turn up. Rugjuan Ruhin bowed to Gu Huayu to greet him, and Rugjuan raised the curtain for Gu Huayu. Gu Huayu got on the car and saw King Qin reaching out to help her, so she put her hand in King Qin's. After Gu Huayu sat down, she asked, Why is Qinjian here? King Qin held Gu Huayu in his arms and whispered back, I miss you. Then he raised his voice and said, Let's go. Gu Huayu raised her head and looked at King Qin, smiling with her eyebrows creasing, and asked, Really? King Qin looked down at the playful Gu Huayu and raised his eyebrows, of course. After saying that, King Qin lowered his head and kissed Gu Huayu's forehead. Gu Huayu asked softly, "Where are we going?" King Qin said seriously, "Take you home. Going to Prince Qin's mansion." King Qin rubbed Gu Huayu's head and said, "Smart." Gu Huayu responded proudly, "Of course." Looking at Gu Huayu's eloquent appearance, King Qin couldn't help but lowered his head and blocked the last words of Gu Huayu in his mouth. Gu Huayu was stunned for a moment, then raised her arms to wrap her arms around King Qin's neck and responded. The two were lingering, as if expressing the pain of missing each other for the past 2 days. King Qin estimated that the time was almost up, then let go of Gu Huayu and helped her straighten her clothes. The car stopped and Rugjuan said, "Your Majesty, we're here." King Qin got out of the car first, then turned around and stretched out his hand to help Gu Huayu get out of the car. Ruan Chu came over to see Gu Huayu and asked in surprise, "Miss Gu?" Gu Huayu was also stunned, raised her hand and waved it in the air twice, and then said, "Master Ruan-san." King Qin looked at Gu Huayu, then at Ruan Chu, and asked, "You two know each other?" Ruan Chu leaned over and said, "Go back to my lord, I met Miss Gu 3 years ago in Jiangnan." The king of Qin asked doubtfully, "Jiangnan? Aren't you from the capital?" Ruan Chu replied, "I am from the capital city, and my maternal wife's family is in Hangzhou, south of the Yangtze River. 3 years ago, I took advantage of my family vacation to go to the south to visit my grandmother. On the day of the incense gathering on June 19th, I accompanied my grandmother to Lingyan Temple to offer incense, but I didn't expect my grandmother to faint on the way. I happened to meet Miss Gu, who was also going to offer incense. Thanks to Miss Gu's intervention, my grandmother was removed from the temple. Pulled back from the gate of hell." Gu Huayu asked, "How is the old lady now? Are you okay?" Ruan Chu responded repeatedly, "Thank you, Miss Gu. Grandma is very healthy now. My parents will return to Beijing from the border this year. Grandma will also come to the capital to celebrate the new year. I will invite Miss Gu to the house as a guest." Gu Huayu smiled and nodded, "Okay. I will definitely visit the old lady then." Princess, Shi Niang heard that Gu Huayu had passed the palace, so she came over to see her. "Miss Gu is the princess?" Ruan Chu asked in surprise. Rugjuan explained, "General Ruan, Miss Gu is Princess Yan Ran, whom the emperor personally conferred. Ruan Chu usually stays in the capital camp and rarely returns to the capital. He knows very little about the things that are rumored in the world. I only know that the emperor made Hua Ling's daughter the princess." Ruan Chu suddenly realized and nodded. It turned out that she was Uncle Hua's daughter. Gu Huayu jumped to Shi Niang's side, took Shi Niang's hand and asked, "Smelly Foot Fairy, have you missed me?" Shi Niang replied, "Of course I have. I miss the princess, Lonicera, and Aunt Wang. When will the princess marry? Merge the 2 mansions into one." Ru Xian, Ru Jin pursed his lips to hold back a smile. Gu Huayu raised her hand to hit Shi Niang. Shi Niang quickly took 2 steps back, bent her knees and said, "Come on, I was wrong. I apologize to the princess. Today, I let the kitchen become the princess. My favorite is mapo tofu, boiled fish fillets, and, by the way, the princess's favorite skewers." When talking about food, Gu Huayu took back her hand and asked, "Do you have any wine?" Shi Niang responded, Yes, yellow rice wine, with shredded and rock sugar." Gu Huayu responded happily, "Perfect. There is no grill in the palace, otherwise I would have asked the kitchen to cut some mutton for roasting." Gu Huayu said, "Tomorrow I will ask King Yu to deliver the grill." "That's good. Princess, remember to ask Xing Yu to send some seasonings for the roasted meat," Shi Niang reminded her politely. Gu Huayu nodded in agreement, turned to look at King Qin, and asked, "Brother Zikan, where are you eating? King Qin reached out to hold Gu Huayu's hand and asked, where is the food? Ruan Chu saw that everyone was not surprised, and he knew in his heart that this was the normal way for the two of them to get along. Gu Huayu turned her head and looked at King Qin and said with a smile, you don't know either. King Qin shook his head and said, I just moved in today, and I have never been here before. Shi Niang bent her knees and said, Your Majesty, Princess, please come with me. Shi Niang brought the two of them to the flower hall. Your Majesty, Princess, please come in. According to your Majesty's wishes, I will stay in the palace the first day, and everyone will gather together to have a lively atmosphere. So I chose this place. End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 285. Chapter 285 Prince Jin's Mansion. King Qin looked at the neatly arranged tables and chairs in the hall, nodded with satisfaction, and led Gu Huayu into the flower hall. Le Shun came in with his servants to serve King Qin and Gu Huayu to wash their hands and faces. Wait for King Qin and Gu Huayu to take their seats and greet them and pass on the dishes. Immediately, the maid and chambermaid came in with dishes. Shi Niang stood behind Gu Huayu. Gu Huayu turned around and said something to Shi Niang. When she turned around, she saw a gorgeous maid peeking at King Qin. Gu Huayu glanced at King Qin and saw that he was reaching out to put her favorite slices of boiled meat in front of her. The sourness that had just emerged in Gu Huayu's heart dissipated a little, and her eyes became gentle. When the dishes were served, King Qin turned to Shi Niang and Le Shun and said, There is no need to wait here, you can go and eat. Li Shun wanted to say something else, but was stopped by Shi Niang's eyes as he handed him over. He lowered his hands and followed Shi Niang back down. The flower hall is spacious, and the positions of King Qin and Gu Huayu are in the middle of the upper row. There is only one table in the upper row. 3 or 4 steps away from the top, there is a large table on the left and right sides. On the right side is the palace where the stewards are sitting. On the left are Rugjuan and the others who are being served closely by the prince. 7 or 8 steps further down, 3 tables were set up on the left and right sides. Those who were seated were the servants of the palace, divided into men and women. Gu Huayu has good eyesight. She raised her head and looked around the hall. Her eyes were like radar, quickly and accurately locking on the maid who had just peeked at King Qin. The maid sat facing them, just in time to put King Qin in her eyes. When Gu Huayu looked over, the maid was looking at King Qin. Perhaps because of the distance, the maid's gaze was a bit blatant and unscrupulous. King Qin took 2 skewers and handed them to Gu Huayu. I've tasted them. They taste good. You can try them. Gu Huayu looked away and took it with a smile. Okay, thank you, Your Majesty. After hearing what Gu Huayu said, King Qin quickly took the string back. Gu Huayu was stunned, looked at King Qin intently, and asked, What's wrong? Didn't you let me have a taste? King Qin met Gu Huayu's gaze and said seriously, I like to hear you call me Brother Zikan, or call me Qinjian. Change it? Gu Huayu just saw the little maid staring at King Qin again, and her heart immediately started to feel jealous. King Qin happened to hand the skewers to her, so Gu Huayu called her prince sourly. Seeing that King Qin was angry, Gu Huayu obediently said, Thank you Qinjian. King Qin made an intoxicating smile on his lips and handed the string in his hand to Gu Huayu again. Gu Huayu was stunned by King Qin's smile. King Qin raised his hand and said with a smile, Are you stupid? Go on. Gu Huayu came back to her senses, reached out to take the string, and did not forget to explain, Qinjian, your smile is so beautiful. King Qin was stunned, and then said, Don't worry, little vinegar vat, I only smile at you. Eat quickly. Gu Huayu raised her head and looked at King Qin, who blinked her eyes. Gu Huayu understood. It turned out that he knew all her little emotions. Having her little thoughts exposed on the spot made Gu Huayu very uncomfortable on the face, but she liked it in her heart. She was relieved. As long as Zikin only had eyes for her, the turbulent outside world was no threat to her. If Zikin doesn't have her in his heart, why does the outside world need to threaten her? In the world of two people, in the final analysis, it depends on whether this person has you in his heart. Zikin's heart and eyes are all about her now, so why should she bother herself? After thinking about this, Gu Huayu stopped giving the maid extra looks and focused only on King Qin. The king of Qin served her food, and she also served it to him. The two of them seemed to have a barrier of their own. Ruan Chu was immersed in eating like Rugjuan and others. Ruan Chu was shocked at first, then calm, and then he was immersed in eating like Rugjuan and others. After dinner, King Qin asked, "Shall we go for a walk together to eat?" Gu Huayu accepted it happily. "Okay. Let's take a look at Prince Qin's mansion at night." King Qin stood up and took Gu Huayu's hand out of the flower hall. As soon as the two of them left the flower hall, a maid peeked at them secretly. "Hang hang," Shi Niang coughed a few times. The maid who took a peek quickly averted her gaze and stood by the side with her hands down. Shi Niang glanced at the maids and said in a deep voice, "Today is the first time, so I pretend I didn't see anything. If there is another time, don't blame me for being rude. I have remembered everything. If you want to do it well, you must keep your own responsibilities, do what you should do, and don't dream about things that don't belong to you." The maids who took a peek were so ashamed and blushing that they wanted to find a crack in the ground to get in. After Shi Niang finished speaking, she told the stewards with a straight face, "Although you have just returned to Prince Qin's mansion today, you did not start working today. There is no need for me to elaborate on the rules of being a servant, you all understand them. As a steward, you receive 1 tael of silver more than others every month. If you receive 1 tael more than others, you will have to do 1 more tael of work and bear 1 more responsibility. Understand?" Several stewards bowed their knees and responded. Shi Niang continued, "Go back and make yourself and your subordinates memorize the rules of the house and take care of your subordinates. If something happens, don't blame me for not reminding you." The stewardess knelt down and thanked me. Shi Niang said calmly, "Everyone performs their duties. After cleaning up, go to the flower hall to do your business." King Qin led Gu Huayu along the corridor. It was October weather. Under the night, the air was slightly cool. The king of Qin asked, "Is it cold?" Gu Huayu shook her head, "I just drank 2 glasses of wine, it's a little warm, it's just right now." Gu Huayu looked around and said, "This palace looks quite big." King Qin looked around and said, "It's not small. I took a look at the land deed brought by the Ministry of Rights today. The entire palace within the walls covers an area of 750 acres. The 6 alleys outside the wall also belong to the palace, and are where the servants of the palace live. After the emperor entered the palace, some of the servants from the original palace followed him into the palace. Some of them were sent out, while others stayed to guard the palace. In those houses in the alleys, those who stayed to look after the palace still live in the same place. The rest of the vacated houses belonged to the royal family and were rented out, and the rent money was used as royal income. The Ministry of Rights said that they have negotiated with the Ministry of Internal Affairs and that within a month, they will hand over the land deeds of several alleys. Gu Huayu understands that if a house is rented out and then taken back, it will take time to find another place to live. Gu Huayu asked, "Now, are the servants in the mansion rewarded by the palace?" King Qin said, "Not entirely. Lai Shun, Lai Wang and the 8 internal servants, Ruan Chu and the internal servants were rewarded by the emperor. Several stewards and maids were rewarded by the imperial concubine. The imperial concubine is now in charge of the harem, and she will make the arrangements. We can only accept her kindness." Gu Huayu nodded and said, "That's right. Speaking of which, the imperial concubine also has good intentions. King Qin put his arm around Gu Huayu's shoulders and said helplessly, "Who says it's not the case? She sent people into my house, and I have to express my gratitude to her." Gu Huayu said worriedly, "So, aren't there people's spies everywhere in your house?" King Qin was not nervous. He spread his hands and said, "If they like it, let them stare." Gu Huayu turned to look at him. "You must have a way." "Right." King Qin raised his hand and rubbed Gu Huayu's head. "If I say there is nothing I can do, will you sympathize with me and agree to get married as soon as possible and marry me to help me take care of these messy things?" Gu Huayu said, "Then I will quickly find out the real culprit, and then I will marry you and be your good wife." King Qin pursed his lips and smiled. "Okay, let's investigate together. By the way, my father asked me to take a post in the Ministry of Punishment so that we can investigate the case." Father Huang said that after Uncle Hua was killed, Mr. Hua immediately organized people to investigate the truth. But my father received a threatening letter, and the other party used me as a bargaining chip to prevent Hua Lao from finding out the truth. Father had no choice but to ask Eunuch Gao to go to Jiangnan to meet Hua Lao and beg Hua Lao to stop and not pursue the matter for the time being. Gu Huayu suddenly realized, "So that's it?" Mr. Zhu said that after they learned that their father was killed, they immediately organized people to investigate the truth. Later, someone died in the palace, and then my grandfather gave an order not to pursue the matter further. The two of them were walking and talking, but they had no intention of looking at the scenery in the house. King Qin said, "It has been many years since this happened, and it is not easy to find out now. But I believe that the passing geese leave traces, and the passing wind leaves sounds. As long as you search carefully, you will always find clues." Gu Huayu nodded, "Yes. Don't worry, let's investigate slowly. The truth will be revealed one day." King Qin turned his head to look at Gu Huayu and said, "How can I not be anxious? I want to marry you into the palace, but I have to find out the truth as soon as possible and avenge Uncle Hua, so you can marry me." Gu Huayu said with a smile, "When it comes to solving a case, as long as we find clues, we can find out the truth very quickly. Maybe we solved the case a few years ago. I hope that, as you said, we solved the case years ago. After the year, I will ask my mother, and, to ask my father to grant us a marriage." King Qin first thought of asking Mrs. Ye to come to propose marriage, but suddenly realized that his identity had changed. His marriage required the emperor's nod, so he changed his mind and asked the emperor to grant the marriage. Speaking of Mrs. Ye, Gu Huayu thought of Mrs. Ye's poisoning, so she stopped and looked around, trying to find an open place to talk in case someone listened to her. When King Qin saw her stopping, he stopped and asked, "What's the matter?" Gu Huayu pointed to a pavilion not far away in the garden, and said, "Qinjian, I'm tired from walking, let's go sit in the pavilion." King Qin nodded and said, "Okay. How about I carry you?" Gu Huayu looked up at King Qin and asked, "Are you sure? I'm not taking it lightly." In Gu Huayu's heart, King Qin was just a weak scholar. How could he carry her? King Qin raised his eyebrows and said, "Little girl, you question me? I'm not as weak as you think." With that said, King Qin reached out and lifted Gu Huayu's arm, put it on his shoulder, and carried Gu Huayu on his back with half-bent knees. By the time Gu Huayu came to her senses, she was already on King Qin's back. Gu Huayu did not expect that King Qin would take action directly. She knows her weight. Although she is not fat, she is still tall at 1.68 meters. In addition, she pays attention to health and has never controlled her diet to lose weight deliberately. Her weight has never dropped below 100. She only went on the scale a few days ago and weighed 51.2 kilograms, 102 pounds, and 40 pounds. Gu Huayu rested her head on King Qin's shoulder and said, "Qinjian, that's amazing, you can actually carry me on your back." It's no wonder that Gu Huayu was surprised. King Qin was young and frail, and he once thought of practicing martial arts to strengthen his body. Later, he found that there was poison in his body, so he did not dare to practice martial arts again, for fear that moving too much would accelerate the poisoning. Hence, King Qin left the image of a frail and sickly scholar in people's hearts. Entering the pavilion, King Qin put Gu Huayu down and repeated, "I'm not as weak as you think." Gu Huayu was surprised, and a flash of inspiration flashed in her mind, and she said, "Come on, let's break your arms and I'll test your strength." King Qin followed his instructions and put his elbow on the stone table. Gu Huayu reached out to hold his hand and counted, 1, 2, 3, start. King Qin began to exert force on his hand, and Gu Huayu said, "Use all your strength and let me see your strength." The king of Qin understood the meaning of Gu Huayu, so he tried his best to compete with Gu Huayu. King Qin suddenly increased his strength, and Gu Huayu's hand was pressed firmly on the stone table by King Qin, unable to move at all. At this time, it was not just Gu Huayu who was shocked, King Qin was also staring at his hand in shock. After a while, King Qin looked up at Gu Huayu, "Xiao, are you not using enough strength?" The king of Qin knew that Gu Huayu was not an ordinary lady, she was very talented. Gu Huayu didn't remember whether she had exerted any more force, so she said, "Let's do it again." King Qin nodded and said, "Okay." He also wanted to confirm again whether this was true. So, the two of them put their elbows on the stone table again and held each other's hands tightly. Gu Huayu said, "Qinjian, this time, you gradually increase your strength." King Qin nodded. It is still Gu Huayu who gives the orders. After Gu Huayu gave the order to start, King Qin gradually increased the strength of his hands. Gu Huayu felt the pressure on her hands little by little. She went from being evenly matched to being unable to do anything, to being suppressed by King Qin on the stone table and unable to move, leaving no room for resistance. Gu Huayu looked at the two hands clasped together and could still clearly remember the process of her own struggle. "Qinjian, have you practiced martial arts?" King Qin shook his head, "No, after you detoxified me, I thought about practicing martial arts. Rugjuan and the others said that you should start practicing Qigong from a young age, and they said that I had missed it, so I stopped thinking about practicing Qigong. In the past few years, I have been working vigorously and have never felt tired. I just thought it was because the poison in my body was detoxified and didn't think much about it." Gu Huayu naturally understood what was going on. No wonder Qin Feng was so heartbroken when he found out that she had saved Zikin with the elixir. Gu Huayu thought about looking back to old man Qin to ask about the efficacy of the pill. It should be because the poison has been detoxified. By the way, speaking of poison, I just wanted to tell you about MRS's poisoning. When King Qin heard about his aunt's poisoning, he said seriously, "What about my aunt's poisoning? Xiao, have you made any new discoveries?" Gu Huayu nodded and said, "I found out about what happened to Mrs Zikin Gafiya when I gave her an acupuncture at the British government palace that day." The king of Qin asked, "When did you just return to the capital?" Gu Huayu nodded and said, "Yes, it's just that it caused a big trouble. My wife was not awake at the time, so I didn't dare to say anything. I thought I would wait for my wife to wake up and try to find out what she said, and then I would look for an opportunity and then tell you in detail. What happened later changed more than planned. Before I had time to ask Madam for confirmation, you recognized Shi Niang, and things evolved into today's situation." End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Rebirth of Space, The Lucky Girl from a Farm Family. Author, He Would Fire Every. Chapter 286. Chapter 286 Giving Advice. King Qin looked at Gu Huayu in shock, and after a while he asked, "Is the poison in my aunt's body related to the air?" Gu Huayu nodded, "Yes, the poison madam was exposed to was made from some strange poisons from the western regions. This poison can make people infertile. Also, if a person is poisoned by this poison, once a wound appears on the body, bleeding will continue until death." King Qin's expression became serious and he said, "The person who poisoned her is so vicious. Even if my aunt is lucky enough to have an heir, she will die from bleeding during delivery." Gu Huayu nodded, "Exactly. During delivery, you will bleed and die." King Qin suddenly raised his head and looked at Gu Huayu intently. He thought of the death of his mother, his heart tightened, and he asked with a bit of anger in his eyes, "Xiao, do you think the queen was also poisoned by the same poison?" Gu Huayu understood King Qin's mood. "Queen, Mrs. Yeah, of these two, one is the mother who gave birth to him, and the other is the aunt who raised him. They are his closest relatives and the people he wants to protect the most. Any one of them is his weakness, and if anyone is hurt, it is a painful experience for him. The gangsters attacked the two of them at the same time, causing one of them to die and the other to almost die. How could King Qin not be angry?" Gu Huayu was worried that King Qin would not be able to accept it and did not dare to give a positive answer. She only said, "It is possible, but it is just speculation." "Unless?" King Qin asked eagerly, "Unless what?" Gu Huayu reached out and held King Qin's hand, and said comfortingly, "Qinjian, I understand how you feel. Take a deep breath and calm yourself down first. We have to find evidence." King Qin held Gu Huayu's hand instead, took care of Huayu's request, took a deep breath, calmed down, and then asked, "Xiao, what evidence are you looking for?" Gu Huayu said, "Ask madam if she still has the quilt that used to wrap you up. You were born in such circumstances and were carried out of the palace right after you were born. There must be blood stains on the quilt. Through the blood stains, I can find out if the queen is poisoned." King Qin nodded and said, "Tomorrow I am going to the Qingqiu palace to visit my grandmother and the others. Tomorrow I will ask my aunt. It's just a dirty quilt. I'm afraid my aunt won't keep it." Gu Huayu said, "If madam throws away the bag, then we can only check the queen's bones to see if there are toxins in the bones. Is this feasible for the emperor?" King Qin said frankly, "This is a bit difficult. Ask your aunt first. If she has clues, that would be the best. If the clues on the aunt's side are lost, then talk to the father about it and see his attitude." Gu Huayu nodded, "Okay, that's it." In the study room of Prince Yen's mansion, Prince Yen sat at the top, leaning slightly to the right. He looked at the Prime Minister on his right and said, "Looking at the current situation, Prime Minister, what should we do?" The Prime Minister put the teacup in his hand on the table and said, "This incident of King Qin has shocked the whole government and the public at a loss. However, the more trouble we encounter, the more calm we have to be, so let's wait and see what happens." The wise king frowned slightly and asked, looking on coldly. The Prime Minister nodded, "Yes, let's just wait and see how everyone reacts. Especially the reactions of the other gentlemen." The British Duke took the call and asked, "How many other gentlemen?" The British Duke has never paid attention to the other princes. Naturally, he will not care about their reactions. Hang Xiang said, "According to my opinion, the current situation has little impact on the prince. The prince only needs to do the things assigned by the emperor well and let the emperor see the prince's ability. As for everything else, you have to plan slowly, not in a hurry." The British Duke disagreed and said, "This method is not advisable. Mr. Wang, you don't understand King Qin too well." The wise king nodded and took over the words, "Grandpa's concerns are very true. Prime Minister, you don't understand Zikin. Qin has always been favored by his father, and his father made Qin the king of Qin. The meaning is obvious. If we don't take measures, are we going to see Zikin's wings mature? By then, do we still have a chance? The worry of the wise king was not unreasonable. Zikin had been his companion, and he knew Zikin's ability well. In addition to Zikin's ability, he was even more worried about the emperor's preference for Zikin. As for Zikin, how much he admired him before, now he is afraid of him. Hang Xiang explained, "Your Majesty, please be patient and listen to what I have to say." The wise king nodded and said, "Master Xiang, please speak." Wang Xiang continued, "The king of Qin was favored by the emperor before, just because he was the nephew of concubine De. Besides the queen, the emperor favored him a little for concubine De's sake." The wise king sat up straight, shook his head slightly, and said disapprovingly, "Wrong, wrong, wrong, Prime Minister, you don't understand Zikin too well. I have grown up with Zikin since I was a child. I know Zikin better than I know myself. What the Prime Minister said is just like most of the rumors. Is this really the case? This is a misunderstanding, a huge misunderstanding. Long ago, I, like the Prime Minister, thought that my father's preference for Ziqin was all due to the relationship between his mother and the queen." The king asked doubtfully, "Isn't it?" The wise king nodded and said, "No, Zikin is special to his father. At that time, Zikin was only the sixth son of the British Duke. To be favored by the father, one cannot use the word favor, but should be described as doting. His father remembered all of Ziqin's preferences. Whether it was the Qianqing Palace or the Hall of Supreme Harmony, wherever his father lived, Ziqin's favorite melon slices were displayed. No other prince was treated like this, not even the king of Qi, who was born to a noble concubine, had never been so loved by his father. Zikin liked white and elegant clothes. Every year, his father would ask eunuch Gao to sort out all kinds of plain and elegant clothes from the yun brocade and shu brocade tapestry that he paid as tribute every year, and select the best ones for Zikin. Over the years, apart from Zikin, which prince has received such care from his father? When I was young, I was naughty and mischievous, and my father found out about it, so I was punished. But as soon as Zikin opened his mouth to plead for me, my father would only give me a few words of scolding with a straight face, and he would not pursue it any further. Ziqin went to the palace to see his father. No matter how busy his father was, he would always see Ziqin and let him have a meal with him. Speaking of dining with my father, the number of times that I and my other royal brothers dine with my father combined are not as many as Zikin's. The Prime Minister may not believe it, but I have grown so old that I have had meals with my father 4 times. Of course, except for large gatherings like palace banquets. Out of the 4 meals, 3 of them were brought here by me following Ziqin. The other time, I shamelessly stayed in Qianqing Palace to beg. These are only things that the king has seen with his own eyes. There are also things that the king has not seen. I, the king, know that as long as Zikin enters the palace, his father will almost always be alone with him. The only person who knows about this is eunuch Gao, who is closely attentive to his father. I think that based on my father's preference for Ziqin, my father made Ziqin the king of Qin. From now on, he will always think about Ziqin and protect him step by step as he ascends to the throne." The king was extremely shocked after hearing the words of the wise king. He had heard that the emperor favored Lu Zikin for a long time. He only regarded it as the emperor's gratitude to the queen and the small number of people in the Ye family. Therefore, the emperor was more partial to the nephews of the queen's natal family. The prime minister never expected that the emperor would be so partial to Lu Zikin. Could it be that the emperor knew that Lu Zikin was his son? If this is the case, would the emperor have already made plans? When King Qin was still Lu Zikin, he and the emperor had a father-son affection. Didn't the emperor see everything he had done to Lu Zikin before? Thinking of this, Prime Minister Wang's back felt cold and his body couldn't help but shudder. Once the seeds of doubt take root in the heart, they will soon grow wildly. Wang Xiang's mind was spinning rapidly, and there was a voice in his heart that kept reminding him that he had to find a way to stop King Qin. The British Duke nodded and said, "Your Majesty is attentive, sees things clearly, and thinks very carefully." The Emperor asked Zikin to recognize his ancestor and return to the clan, and named him King of Qin. The Prime Minister needs to know that the Emperor entered the palace from the Prince of Qin's mansion back then. The Emperor's meaning couldn't be clearer. If the Prince wants to compete for that position, he must make plans in advance. Of course, in my opinion, the Prince's current situation is that he can advance and attack and retreat and defend. If the Prince does not compete for that position, it is not bad to be an idle Prince. The Prime Minister needs to think carefully. If Zikin ascends to the throne, will he reuse the Prime Minister's family? The glory of the Wang family will continue with the Prime Minister. In the Prime Minister's thoughts, the Prime Minister looked at the British Duke and said, "Don't worry, Duke of the country. I have promised Sister Yun to the Prince. Naturally, I hope that the Prince will ascend to the throne." The moment the marriage between the two houses was settled, the Prime Minister's mansion and the Prince Yen's mansion became one family. In the days to come, the Prince Yen's mansion was prosperous and the Prime Minister's mansion was prosperous. The British Duke said with a smile, "The Prime Minister is resourceful, and he does things vigorously and neatly. With the Prime Minister planning everything for the Prince will surely ascend to the throne." Seeing the opportunity, the wise king raised his hands to the Prime Minister and said, "One day, when this king ascends to the throne, the Prime Minister will be the most important hero." The Prime Minister quickly bowed to the wise king and returned the courtesy, "It is my honor for me to be able to advise you." The old minister had a gap in understanding of the King of Qin before, so he despised the King of Qin. "Your Majesty, don't worry. In the coming days, I will pay attention to what's going on with King Qin." The wise king handed over his hand again, "With the Prime Minister as my anchor, I feel at ease. The current situation is not good for us, so we have to work hard for the Prime Minister." The Prime Minister thought for a moment and said, "It's hard work, but given the current situation, I have some ideas that I don't know whether to talk about or not." The wise king leaned forward and said, "Master Xiang, please speak." The king looked at the wise king and said, "I think that in the coming days, the prince and the King of Qin should get closer. After all, the King of Qin had lived in the British Duke's residence for more than 20 years, and the prince and the King of Qin had been friends since childhood. Now they are even blood brothers." The wise king nodded, "The Prime Minister is right, I have thought about this too. The King of Qin is the eldest brother, and brothers and sisters treat each other respectfully. This is the moral code. This king should respect his elder brother. In the future, I will go to greet my brother more often." The king felt much relieved when he saw that the wise king could listen to his words. Nodded and said, "Your Majesty knows the King of Qin very well, this is our opportunity. However, there are some details that I think the prince should reveal to the other princes and empresses. Because the other masters are also the brothers of the King of Qin, they have a deep love for each other and should be close to each other." The wise king instantly understood what the Prime Minister meant and nodded repeatedly, "The Prime Minister is right. I shouldn't hide my secrets. I should talk to my brothers." Wang Xiang shook his head and said, "The Emperor has recently assigned a lot of things to the prince. The prince is busy with official duties. Many things do not need to be done personally, but only need to be revealed." The King Xian was stunned for a moment, then nodded and said, I understand, thank you Prime Minister for your suggestion. I have been very busy recently, indeed quite busy." Mr. Prime Minister continued. Furthermore, Privy Councillor Huang handed over the beggar's bones, intending to retire and return to his hometown. On the prince's side, we have to quickly pick out a few people and find a way to capture this vacancy. The wise king and the British Duke looked at each other quickly, and then asked, is this serious? The Prime Minister Wang nodded. Privy Huang has some friendship with the old minister. Let the old minister see through his thoughts. The wise king held his chin in his hand and thought for a moment, then looked up at the British Duke and asked, "Grandpa, is there anyone you can recommend?" The British Duke thought for a while, shook his head and said, "The Privy Councillor is a first-class official, and the most suitable person at the moment is Dinkin, but between Dinkin and the King of Qin." Wang Xiang said, "I have also thought about it. For the privy post, the two most likely candidates at the moment are Lu Dinkin and Ruan Jinsong." King Xian said, "Ruan Jinsong is Ruan Chu's father. My father chose Ruan Chu to be the commander of the guards of the Qin Palace. Even if this man goes up, he will not be used by us." Hang Xiang asked, "Does the prince still have candidates for the Jiangyi camp?" The wise king looked at the British Duke. The British Duke thought for a while and said, "Han Zhengbang, the commander of the Jiangyi camp, is also very important. I think it is not good to transfer Han Zhengbang away from the Jiangyi camp. And we cannot expose this hidden stake." Wang Xiang thought for a while and said, "The Duke is right. The Jiangyi camp is also very important. It is best not to move the position of General Han. Then we will support Lu Dinkin." The wise king looked at the Prime Minister and said, "But my uncle and the King of Qin." Wang Xiang said, "MRSE secretly allowed King Qin to live in the British government for more than 20 years. No one in the British government realized that this person was not his descendant. Dinkin has been at the border all year round, so he is probably even more unaware. How would a person with such a spirit like Dinkin feel if he knew that he had been a cheap dad for more than 20 years? After hearing what the Prime Minister said, the British Duke's eyes lit up, he pinched his beard and nodded, saying, "The Prime Minister reminds me that I have to inform him about this in advance so that he can have some idea." The Prime Minister looked at the British Prime Minister and said, "This kind of thing depends on the control of emotions. The Duke needs to seize the opportunity and don't let others take the advantage." The British Duke said, "I understand. I will send someone to meet Dinkin tomorrow." Wang Xiang shook his head and said, "It's best for the Duke to personally handle this matter. There are some things that others should not say." The British Duke thought for a while, nodded and said, "Then I will go there myself." The wise king nodded with satisfaction, "This is a good idea. No matter whether the father chooses my uncle or not, we will plant a thorn in my uncle's heart so that he will not side with King Qin." End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the Lucky Girl from a Farm Family. Author, He Would Fire Every. Chapter 287. Chapter 287 Washed. The next day, King Qin went to the Qinqiu Palace to visit Mrs. Qin. After receiving the letter, Duke Qinqiu's mansion opened the middle door, and Mrs. Qin led the whole family to greet him outside the gate. King Qin's car stopped at the gate of Duke Qinqiu's mansion. When King Qin saw the silver-haired Mrs. Qin, his eyes filled with mist. He looked up and calmed himself down before getting out of the car. Mrs. Qin saw King Qin getting out of the car and brought her family forward to salute him. The King of Qin hurriedly stepped forward and helped Mrs. Qin up. "Why did Grandma come out to welcome her? Just wait for Zikan in Qingfang Hall." Mrs. Qin smiled and said, "How can that be done? If that's the case, wouldn't it be a violation of etiquette?" Mrs. Qin was telling the truth. After hearing this, King Qin felt very uncomfortable and worried about being seen out, so he smiled and greeted Mr. Qin. After exchanging a few words of greetings, King Qin supported Mrs. Qin and walked into the palace. A group of people entered the main hall of the outer courtyard and made courtesies. King Qin couldn't resist his grandmother, so he had to sit down at the top. After King Qin sat down, he felt extremely uncomfortable. For him, the Qinqiu Palace was his home. In this family, there are elders who love him and care for him, and there are also brothers and sisters who respect and protect him. He returned to Duke Chinquo's mansion as if he were returning to his own home. Everything he was familiar with here made him feel extremely at ease. All of this seems to have changed because his identity has changed. He hoped to be like before. When he returned home, he would go to Qingfang Hall to pay his respects, stay in front of his grandmother, listen to his grandmother's greetings to him, his mother's nagging about him, and his aunt's role as peacemaker in the middle. Mrs. Jean saw King Qin's disappointment and said with relief, "Your identity has changed, but we are still a family. Except for more etiquette, nothing else has changed." King Qin met Mrs. Jean's concerned eyes, and the disappointment in his heart became lighter. King Qin nodded, "Thank you, Grandma. Zikan understands." Mrs. Jian took over the words, "It's not that nothing has changed. Knowing that Zikan is the prince, my mother said that God has been kind to our family. My mother recited sutras in the Buddhist hall for a whole day and thanked the Bodhisattva for his blessing. The whole family, everyone is full of joy." The king of Qin looked at Mrs. Ye, leaned forward and said, "Zikan thanks his mother, and thanks to my aunt for saving me, otherwise, Zikan doesn't know where he would be." After a few days of digestion, Mrs. Ye has accepted the facts before her, and she can face Zikan calmly. Mrs. Ye bowed to King Qin and said, "This is our blessing. That day, I was supposed to enter through the north gate, but the north gate was closed and no one was allowed in or out, so I changed my route to the east gate, but I didn't know that the prince happened to be at the east gate." Wei Ruo said that her mother-in-law told them before she died that Wei Ruo and Wei Xian should take the prince to the north to find me, and they would pay the prince to me. At that time, the palace was in chaos. In order to avoid people, the two of them hid in the palace from Donghua Gate, and then escaped all the way east out of the east gate. The day before yesterday I went to Sunying to talk about this matter, and it happened that Shi Shangshu was in the house. Shi Shangshu said that the general guarding the north gate at that time was named Lu, and he was from the Queen Mother's side. The Queen Mother sealed the north gate to prevent the soldiers from the Jiangyi camp from entering the city. By some coincidence, that year I went to the border to visit the general. The old woman knew that I was going to the border, so she asked Lu Dingke to go to the border before me and deliver Ant Song to the general. When I arrived at the border, Ant Song had already arrived. A month and a half. 3 days after I arrived, I found out that Ant Song had also gone to the border. In a fit of anger, I took Grandma Yao and the others back. Because I was in a bad mood, I didn't rush back along the way. I walked and rested on the road. It took me more than half a year to return to the capital. When I entered the city, I picked up the prince at the Tutu temple and raised the prince in this way. Around. The people present were sighing again, feeling that there was only destiny in the world. The king of Qin looked at Mrs. Ye. He felt a little sad for her, and he was also a little annoyed with Lu Dinken. Since he married his aunt, he should treat her well. King Qin turned to look at Aunt Feng who was beside Mrs. Jean, and said, "Mammy, take this person down first. I have something to tell my grandmother." Mother Feng bent her knees and responded, "Okay, I understand." King Qin looked at Ye Mingjin, "Sister Jin, please step back as well." Even though Ye Mingjin wanted to stay and listen, she was always afraid of Zikan, so she stood up and walked out obediently. When the people left, Mrs. Jean looked at King Qin and asked, "Your Majesty, what's the matter?" Mrs. Ye also asked, "What's the matter?" King Qin asked, "Auntie, when you picked me up, were there any blood stains on my body?" Mrs. Ye nodded, "Yes, yes." King Qin straightened his back and asked, "What about the quilt that wrapped me in? Did my aunt keep it or throw it away?" Mrs. Ye thought for a while and said, "You have to ask Aunt Yao. She handled these matters." Why did the prince think of asking this? The king of Qin said, "Let Aunt Yao come in and ask." Mrs. Jian got up and went out to call Aunt Yao. Old Madame Qin looked at King Qin without knowing why. asked, "Your Majesty, that quilt is very important." King Qin nodded, and then said, "Xiao suspected that the Queen Mother was poisoned by the same poison as her aunt. If a person is poisoned by that poison, even if he gets pregnant by chance, he will die due to continual bleeding during childbirth. That day I heard Shi Niang say that when my mother gave birth to me, she was bleeding all the time. After she gave birth to me, my mother died. The blood stains on the quilt must have been left by the queen." Xiao wanted to see through the blood stains whether the queen was poisoned. After hearing this, Mrs. Jean and Mrs. Ye looked at each other and their expressions became solemn. When Aunt Yao came in, Mrs. Ye asked, "What did you do with the quilt that carried the prince?" Mama Yao bent her knees and replied, "Go back to madam, the old slave has put the bag away." King Qin did not throw it away when he heard it. He was very happy and asked, "Mommy, where did you put the quilt, the British government's palace or the Qingqiu Duke's palace?" Aunt Yao bent her knees and said, "Go back to your Majesty. The old slave will put it away and put it in the winter coat cabinet in the British ladies' room." Mrs. Jean ordered, "Then you go to the British Duke's palace quickly and get the quilt. When people from the British Duke's palace ask, just say it's cold and come back to get some thick clothes for your wife." Mama Yao bent her knees and responded, "My slave understands." Mrs. Ye said, "You take Zisu with you so that we can take care of each other." Mother Yao nodded, "Thank you, madam, I understand." After Grandma Yao left, everyone in the room looked solemn. Mrs. Jean asked, "My lord, have you told the emperor about this?" King Qin shook his head, "Not yet. I want to wait until the matter is confirmed before I tell my father." Mrs. Jean said, "If the Empress and Sister Shan are poisoned by the same poison, what role does the British government play in the palace coup?" King Qin shook his head, "I don't know yet. Take your time, and the truth will be revealed one day. The emperor asked me to take a post in the Ministry of Punishment, which will make it much easier to investigate the case. Old madam, Princess Yan Ran has come over to give my aunt acupuncture," a servant reported outside the door. Mrs. Jean said with a smile on her face, "Okay." Before Mrs. Jean finished speaking, King Qin hurriedly stood up and said, "I'll go and greet you." Mrs. Jean nodded with a smile and said, "Okay, go quickly." King Qin nodded and walked out. Mrs. Jean and Mrs. Ye wanted to follow them out, but Mrs. Jean stopped them. "Jur, Sister Shan, you two just sit still and let the prince go to greet you." After Mrs. Jean understood, she smiled and replied, "Okay, my wife understands." Gu Huayu's carriage entered the mansion and stopped at the screen wall. When he got off the car, he saw King Qin coming towards him with a smile. Gu Huayu greeted King Qin Fusion. King Qin returned the gift and led Gu Huayu to the main room. Gu Huayu asked, "How is it? Have you asked?" King Qin nodded, "I asked, the bag and quilt were not lost, and Aunt Yao kept them. Aunt Yao, who was with my aunt, went to the British Duke's mansion to get them." "That's great." Gu Huayu was very excited when she heard the good news. When King Qin saw that Gu Huayu was happy, he couldn't help but raise the corners of his mouth and said, "This morning, Shi Niang said that tomorrow there will be a banquet at the prince's palace. Please invite Duke Qingqiu, Duke Ying, King Qi, King Chen, King Xian, and others. When we get together at the house, we can get to know each other as relatives." Gu Huayu is not good at dealing with people, but she knows this etiquette. He nodded and said, "Shi Niang is thoughtful, let her arrange it." King Qin looked at Gu Huayu and asked politely, "Then you can come over to the house early tomorrow to greet me." Gu Huayu stopped, looked up at King Qin, and asked with her fingers, "Me?" King Qin nodded, "You are the hostess, shouldn't you come over to greet the female family members?" Gu Huayu waved her hands repeatedly and said, "I'll forget it. If the name is not justified, what's wrong with me? Mrs. Ye will take care of the female dependents, and MRSGN and others can help you organize it. King Qin looked at Gu Huayu and asked, "You really don't want to go?" "Father, just give me 2 days. The day after tomorrow, I have to go to the morning court, and then go to the Ministry of Punishment to work. I will be busy from now on. We have met. It's all difficult." Gu Huayu still shook her head and said resolutely, "I won't go." Seeing her resolute look, King Qin compromised and said, "Okay, you're free. How about you come and find me?" During the day, I was at the Xingbu Yamen. When I got off the Yamen, I was at the palace. Gu Huayu said, "You have just arrived at the Ministry of Justice and are busy with official duties. In the days since you returned to Beijing, I have not spent time with my grandmother and the others. Furthermore, Xiaoshuang and Kingzu's wedding is coming soon. I am both Xiaoshuang's cousin and Kingzu's master. After worrying about the man's wedding, I also have to worry about the woman's wedding. I'm busy." After hearing what Gu Huayu said, King Qin looked disappointed and asked, "Xiao, when can you worry about my affairs?" Gu Huayu looked up at King Qin and joked, "What? Are you jealous?" King Qin nodded honestly, "Yes, I'm jealous. I'm not as important as King Zhu in your heart." Gu Huayu was speechless for a moment. "Oh, Your Majesty, you are not that good, are you competing with King Zhu?" "You." King Qin grumbled, "My life is not as good as King Zhu's." Gu Huayu was speechless. "Your Majesty, I am the master of King Zhu." King Qin said unconvinced, "In my heart, you are also my master." Gu Huayu was shocked by King Qin's unexpected words of love, and looked around in fright. Fortunately, Lonisara and Leshun followed them from a distance and did not get closer. "Okay, I'll come see you then. I have to ask Su'er to open a Minjiao pavilion near the Xingbu Yamen." King Qin said with raised eyebrows, "No, Rugjuan has already bought the shop opposite Jingbo Tea House and is planning to open a guest house there." Gu Huayu smiled and said, "Oh, you moved quickly enough." Jingbo Tea House was opened by Huarujun. This person should not be underestimated. "Please change the name of your tea house and don't call it Kingju." Gu Huayu smiled and then said seriously. King Qin thought about it and nodded in agreement. "Okay, I'll explain it to Rugjuan later." The two of them were talking and walking, and when they came to the entrance of the main hall, the maid bowed her knees and said, "How do you do, Your Majesty?" "How do you do, Princess?" Yamingjian came over to greet Gu Huayu, and then let Gu Huayu into the house. After greeting each other, Gu Huayu went to the side room to perform acupuncture on MRS. The king of Qin told MRS Qin and MRS Jian about the banquet at his house. MRS Qin happily agreed, "Okay, let's go there early tomorrow. Have just finished the acupuncture here and returned to the main hall." It happened that Grandma Yao and Zisu came back with the baggage. "Your Majesty, this is the quilt that was used to wrap you up back then." King Qin looked at the neatly stacked blankets and felt a bad feeling in his heart. Gu Huayu took the quilt first and shook it off. Where was there a trace of blood on the clean and new quilt? Gu Huayu asked, "Has Grandma washed this little quilt?" Aunt Yao nodded and said, "Back to the princess. The old slave wanted to leave it as a thought for the prince, so he washed it and put it away. If it is not washed, it will become moldy and the hair will grow, and it will be impossible to keep it." Gu Huayu stroked her forehead. She was only thinking about finding evidence, and she forgot about her common sense of life. Gu Huayu turned to look at King Qin and said angrily, "I forgot about this." King Qin comforted him and said, "It's okay. Let's think of other ways." "Thank you, Aunt Yao." Grandma Yao said in panic, "The prince has killed the old slave. How can the old slave deserve the word of thanks from the prince?" MRS said, "Mother Yao, please step aside first." Mama Yao bowed her knees and bowed, then withdrew. MRS Jean asked, "Your Majesty, what should we do next?" When King Qin was about to speak, Gu Huayu spoke first. The clues here are broken. Go back and ask Xi Niang, maybe you can find new clues. Don't worry, old lady, the legal network is wide open, and the truth will always be revealed day. Mrs. Jean nodded, I've been waiting for it for decades. I won't be in a hurry for a while, but I won't be in a hurry. Gu Huayu finished her work and stood up to leave. Seeing that Gu Huayu was about to leave, King Qin stood up and said goodbye, Grandma, I'm going back first. You guys can come here early tomorrow. Mrs. Jean nodded, got up and sent the two of them off. As Gu Huayu walked towards her carriage, she was stopped by King Qin. Xiao, the investigation is important. You take my carriage and follow me to the palace to ask Xi Niang. Gu Huayu asked, what about my car? King Qin told Qingyu, you take Lonisara back first and Xiao follow me to the palace. I will send someone to send Xiao back later. Qingyu looked at Gu Huayu and waited for Gu Huayu's instructions. The king of Qin spoke about this in public, what could she do? He could only nod in agreement, business matters are important. I will follow the prince's arrangement. You guys will go back first. I will go with the prince to the palace to find Xi Niang and ask some questions. Qinjiao responded with his hand. End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 288. Chapter 288 Quarrel. Gu Huayu said goodbye to Mrs. Jean and others, and got on King Qin's carriage to go to King Qin's palace. As the carriage left Qinquo's palace, Gu Huayu asked, where is the British Duke's palace? Do you want to go and invite me? When it came to the British Duke's residence, King Qin didn't want to say more. He just said lightly, as long as I asked Rumin to hand over the post this morning, my etiquette has been fulfilled. As for whether to come or not, that is their business. Gu Huayu nodded, then asked, what did you want me to ask Xi Niang? Didn't Xi Niang tell you everything she knows? King Qin smiled and said, didn't you say you wanted to ask Xi Niang? Gu Huayu explained, I said this because I didn't want Mrs. Jean to worry. King Qin raised his hand to hug Gu Huayu into his arms and said, I know, I want to stay with you longer, that's why I said this. Gu Huayu raised her head and looked at King Qin and said, last night, we separated just at the end of the year. Didn't we stay too long? King Qin suppressed his smile and pretended to be angry and asked, Xiao, are you starting to dislike me? Gu Huayu was stunned, where is this? She was just telling the truth. They separated very late last night, so why did they dislike each other? No, how can I dislike you? Why do you think so? King Qin said sadly, no. Then you don't want to be with me. Gu Huayu looked at King Qin's aggrieved face, feeling amused, helpless, and a little happy, and she hurriedly coaxed, Qinjian, you have wronged me. I thought that you had just moved into the palace and had too much to do. I was worried that you would be too busy, so I didn't dare to be too attached to you. After hearing Gu Huayu's explanation, King Qin's expression softened a lot, and his tone softened. I have nothing to be busy with. The ones who are busy are Xi Niang, Rugjuan, and Ruanchu. In the palace, I am the most idle. At this point, King Qin paused for a moment, and then said, of course, if you say busy, you are indeed very busy. Gu Huayu said considerately, we just moved into the house, how can we not be busy? King Qin lowered his head and pressed it against Gu Huayu's forehead, and said softly, I am indeed very busy. I am busy thinking about you. You are all in my mind. I just want to stay with you all the time. The warm breath spread on Gu Huayu's face, and the sultry words hit her heart, making Gu Huayu's heart beat faster. She was confused and infatuated, and couldn't help but shout, Qinjian. Gu Huayu took the initiative to greet King Qin and kissed him on the mouth. The king of Qin was stunned, and then he became elated, and the little grievance he felt just now disappeared. Until Gu Huayu felt like she was suffocating, King Qin let her go. He looked at Gu Huayu affectionately and said, "Little one, what should I do? I can't wait to get married to you right away." King Qin's voice was hoarse and magnetic, and could confuse people. Coupled with his extremely handsome face, Gu Huayu was so moved that she forgot about revenge and said, "Okay." Rugjuan's voice sounded outside the carriage, "Your Majesty, we have met Prince Ji and his entourage." Gu Huayu was agitated, the emotion in her eyes faded, and she hurriedly stood up from King Qin's arms. Gu Huayu turned her head to look at King Qin and smiled at him, "As long as you are here, I won't panic." Gu Huayu's smile made King Qin feel much better. He smiled at her and lowered his head to straighten his clothes. At this time, King Qi's voice sounded outside the car, "Hello, brother Emperor." King Qin put down the curtain, squeezed Gu Huayu's hand, and whispered, "Sit tight and wait for me." Gu Huayu nodded. The King of Qin stood up, lifted the curtain, got down from the car, bowed his hands to the King of Qi and returned the salute, "Hello, King Qi." King Qi straightened up, played with the folding fan in his hand, and glanced at the carriage behind King Qin. Through the curtains just now, he faintly noticed that there were more than one person in the car, and asked, "Where are you going, brother?" King Qin caught King Qi's eyes and said calmly, "I'm not going anywhere, just go back home." King Qi sincerely invited, "Brother, you have nothing to do. Li Cheng held a literary party in Fanlu. Brother, please go with me to join in the fun. What do you think?" King Qin leaned forward and said, "Thank you, King Qi, for your kindness. I have just moved into the palace, and the palace still needs to be tidied up. I can't accompany King Qi today." After hearing what King Qin said, King Qi suddenly said, "I have forgotten this matter when I arrived. The Emperor's palace is busy with things, so I will not go. I will go to the palace of Qin with the Emperor's brother to help him organize it." After King Qi finished speaking, he looked at King Qin with interest to see how he would respond. King Qin hurriedly leaned over and refused, "Thank you very much for King Qi's kindness. I won't trouble King Qi with these trivial matters. Today I will arrange the palace, and tomorrow I will invite King Qi and several of his younger brothers to come over and sit for a while. It's easy to calculate, find the door." King Qin refused, and King Qi was not surprised. He just cupped his hands and said, "Okay, I will definitely attend the appointment tomorrow." The King of Qin leaned forward and said, "Okay, I will greet the King of Qi at the palace tomorrow. Let's see you tomorrow." "See you tomorrow." King Qi cupped his hands. Just as King Qi was about to turn around, a gust of autumn wind blew up and lifted the curtain of King Qin's carriage. King Qi saw a pair of feet wearing light blue embroidered shoes in the car, his eyes darkened, and he snorted, there was indeed someone in the car. The King of Qin watched the King of Qi get into the chariot. When his chariot was far away, he turned around and got into the chariot. Gu Huayu looked at King Qin with a smile and asked, "Is he gone?" King Qin nodded, "Let's go. Go to Fanlu to attend the cultural gathering held by Li Cheng." Gu Huayu heard what King Qin and King Qi said just now, and sensitively captured something in her heart. She turned to look at King Qin and asked, "When Hui?" The King of Qin nodded, "Yes, it should be the intention of the King of Qi to organize it in Fanlu in the name of Li Cheng." Gu Huayu said, "Are you trying to win over the scholars in this department? The line is long enough." Therefore, in recent years, the King of Qi held many cultural gatherings. Li Cheng was considered to be an outstanding literary talent among the children of aristocratic families in the capital, and his reputation was accumulated through numerous literary gatherings. Although Gu Huayu doesn't understand the affairs in the court, she knows in her heart that in this era, Wen Hui is a good way to bring people closer. Ziming's identity has changed now, and Gu Huayu suddenly wants to know his thoughts. So he asked, Qinjian, what are your plans for the future? King Qin turned his head to meet Gu Huayu's gaze, and he understood the future she was referring to. King Qin shook his head, I haven't thought about it, just live your life now. The emperor has been looking for me for more than 20 years. During these 20 years, although I have grown up by my father's side and often play chess and drink tea with him, I have accompanied him as someone else's child, not as his son. In front of him. Since I'm back, I should fulfill my filial piety and do what a son should do. At the end, King Qin asked, Xiao, do you want me to fight for that position? Gu Huayu shook her head, I don't understand the important matters related to the court, so I won't express my opinion. I respect your wishes. If you want to dedicate myself to Daxing, I will stand behind you as a good helper and do my best to share your worries and solve your problems. If you just want to be an idle prince, I will stay by your side and accompany you to travel all over the mountains and rivers, and we will live a leisurely idle life together. King Qin narrowed his eyes slightly and repeated, seriously? Gu Huayu nodded, of course I take it seriously. King Qin sat up straight, looked at Gu Huayu, and said seriously, if I have to choose between the mountains and rivers and the idle clouds and wild cranes, I would rather choose a beautiful woman to live a leisurely life in my arms. The king of Qin obviously chose to be an idle prince and spend his free days wandering around the world with Gu Huayu. But the focus of Gu Huayu's listening was on the beauty in her arms, and she said sourly, sit in that position, and you will have a harem of 3,000 beauties, all of them fat and thin, all of them stunning in the world, and no better. King Qin raised his hand and pinched his cheek, lowered his head and looked at Gu Huayu, and asked, are you jealous? Gu Huayu looked at King Qin, shook her head, turned away her face and said stiffly, no. King Qin turned his head and looked at Gu Huayu, really? You're not lying? You're a duplicitous little guy, he's obviously jealous. Having been exposed, Gu Huayu felt ashamed. She turned back to look at King Qin and said seriously, no. King Qin was annoyed when he saw Gu Huayu, but he was not afraid of death and teased, aren't you afraid that I have 3,000 beauties in the harem, all of them fat and thin, all of them stunningly beautiful? King Qin's words stepped on Gu Huayu's tail. Gu Huayu raised her head, raised her chest, raised her chin, and said, Your Highness, take a good look at it. Gu Huayu has exquisite facial features, fair skin, beautiful appearance, and graceful figure. The key is that he has a good brain. Yes. Bar. King Qin was a little confused, and a bad feeling suddenly arose. He nodded and replied, yes. What next? Gu Huayu said, if you don't have me in your heart, why should I beg for nothing and stick to you? We are different, and we are both beautiful. Gu Huayu spoke extremely seriously, which made King Qin feel a little bit afraid, as if Gu Huayu would disappear in front of his eyes immediately. Xiao, don't ever think of leaving me. As he spoke, King Qin reached out to hug Gu Huayu. Gu Huayu stood up and let King Qin hug him. Your Majesty is so unreasonable that you allow yourself to be surrounded by countless beauties, but you don't allow me to leave you. What's the point? Because at that time you were the most noble person in the world. So, I have to make do with you? Then just think about it, I have something else to do, so I'm leaving. After saying that, Gu Huayu raised the curtain and jumped out of the car. Rugjuan was so frightened that he quickly stopped the car and shouted, Princess. Gu Huayu didn't respond to Rugjuan, and before King Qin's guards could react, he quickly ran into the alley on the street. King Qin hunched over his waist and looked at Gu Huayu disappearing into the alley, feeling as if his heart had been hollowed out. Rugjuan turned back to look at King Qin, and saw King Qin staring in the direction Gu Huayu left with a sullen face. He sighed slightly and called, Your Majesty. King Qin came to his senses, pointed to the two guards beside the car, and said, You two, hurry up and chase Xiao back to Wutong Lane. The two guards bowed down and immediately chased him into the alley. The king of Qin then said, Lai Shunlei will drive the car back to the palace, and Rugjuan will follow me to Wuotong Lane. You will come back to the palace with Lai Shun, and you are not allowed to follow me. The guards looked at each other, not knowing what to do. Seeing King Qin's sullen face, Lai Shun thought that there were secret guards following him, thinking that nothing would happen, so he said to the guards, listen to the prince. The guards nodded one by one. King Qin got out of the car and said to Rugjuan, we are looking for a shortcut. We must first go back to Wuotong Lane in a whisper. Gu Huayu walked quickly through the alley until she reached the wide main street, and then she allowed herself to slow down. Not wanting to cause a scene like last time, Gu Huayu raised her hand and called a carriage back to Wuotong Lane. Two guards caught up and saw Gu Huayu getting into the car, so they followed the car and took Gu Huayu to Wuotong Lane. They watched Gu Huayu get out of the car and enter the mansion before turning back to Prince Jin's mansion. Leaving together with the two guards was Wei Tian, who was beside King Qi. Wei Tian went to Fan Tower and whispered to King Qi, Your Majesty, the person in King Qin's car is Princess Yan Ran. After hearing this, King Qi's face darkened. Sure enough, it was her. King Qi stood up and walked out. Li Cheng saw him and asked, Where are you going, Your Majesty? King Qi said casually, You are free to do whatever you want, I will go to the palace. Li Chen nodded and sat down to continue chatting with others. King Qi walked to the backyard, stood under a laurel tree, and asked, Tell me in detail what you saw. Wei Tiandao, after receiving the prince's order, I turned around and chased the king of Qin's car. I happened to see Princess Yan Ran getting off the king of Qin's car in the Jade Alley. It seemed that the king of Qin had a quarrel. The king of Qin asked his guards to catch up with Princess Yan Ran, and the younger one followed him. It wasn't until he saw Princess Yan Ran returning to the mansion that the younger one came back to report to him. King Qi said, Assign 2 people to go to Wuotong Lane to keep an eye on it. Wei Tian bowed and said, I understand, little one. When Gu Huayu returned to the house, she first went to the main courtyard to say hello to her grandmother, and then accompanied her to do some household chores. Ms. Ping saw that Gu Huayu was not in a high mood and thought she was tired, so she said, You must be tired of Xiao. Go back and have a rest quickly. It's time for me to take a lunch break. Gu Huayu obeyed and said goodbye to Ms. Ping. When Gu Huayu returned to her yard, Ling Dong asked, Didn't the princess go to Prince Jin's mansion to ask Shi Niang for questioning? Why are you back so early? Gu Huayu said casually, It's just a matter of a few words. I'll be back after I finish asking. Ling Dong believed it. Oh, that's it? The princess is back so soon, hasn't she eaten yet? Is this slave going to get some food for the princess? Gu Huayu shook her head, No, I've eaten. I'm a little sleepy. I want to take a nap. You can go down. Ling Dong bent his knees and responded, Okay, slave, please step aside now, and the princess can sleep peacefully. Gu Huayu waited for Lonisara to exit, walked over, closed the door and locked it. Hearing the sound of the bolt falling, Lian Dong thought that Gu Huayu didn't want anyone to disturb her, so she didn't take it to heart. Gu Huayu walked to the soft couch, fell up, and leaned on the soft couch. My eyes are looking forward, but I don't know where the focus is. All I can think about is King Qin's words, Don't be afraid of the 3,000 beauties in my harem, who are all fat and thin, and all of them are stunningly beautiful. Gu Huayu said in a low voice, Zikan, you are a big bastard. You didn't even catch up to my aunt when she left. If you dare to betray me, my aunt will look better than you. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Rebirth of Space, The Lucky Girl from a Farm Family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 289. Chapter 289 Complaint. Gu Huayu reached out to touch Qingfeng and was about to enter the space to find someone to complain about. Little guy, how do you want me to look good? Huh, the sudden voice made Gu Huayu tremble. Gu Huayu looked over for the sound and saw King Qin standing at the door of the inner room with his hands behind his back. Obviously, before she entered the house, King Qin had already entered the house before her. When Gu Huayu saw King Qin, she jumped up in fright. Her face turned pale, and she stared at King Qin blankly for a while. Then she stuttered and asked, "You, when did you come?" Just now, she almost entered space. If King Qin watched her disappear on the spot, would he faint from fear? King Qin came over and stood next to Gu Huayu, looked down at her and replied, "I arrived a quarter of an hour ago." Gu Huayu looked at King Qin, her heart was beating fast and she couldn't calm down for a long time. She was terribly frightened today. Seeing Gu Huayu's ugly face, King Qin thought she was still angry. He stretched out his arms to hold her in his arms and asked warmly, "Little one, are you still angry?" Gu Huayu leaned on King Qin's love for a long time and finally calmed down. He pouted and said, "You already have 3,000 beauties in the harem, why don't you allow me to be a little angry?" King Qin raised Gu Huayu's chin with his hand, asked her to face him, and said, "Little guy, are you still being unreasonable?" "Who said these words first?" "Huh. I'm just teasing you with what you said, do you take it seriously?" Gu Huayu felt a little guilty when asked by King Qin. She avoided looking at King Qin and raised her hand to block King Qin's hand, then sat down on the soft couch. He said angrily, "I don't remember, I just remember that you said the words." King Qin laughed angrily, sat down next to Gu Huayu, raised his hand and hugged Gu Huayu again. "You little thing, no one can say this, but I can't, right?" Gu Huayu lowered her head and said nothing. King Qin lowered his head and whispered to Gu Huayu, "Little guy, you can't misunderstand me. Otherwise, I will feel wronged and it will hurt here." As he said that, King Qin grabbed Gu Huayu's hand and put it on his chest. Gu Huayu's awkward heart instantly softened and she whispered, "I'm sorry, I was wrong. I shouldn't be angry for no reason." King Qin lowered his eyes and looked at the cute little guy in his arms, feeling extremely satisfied. He gently bit Gu Huayu's earlobe and said dotingly, "It's because I didn't do a good enough job that you worried about gains and losses and lost control of your emotions." Gu Huayu raised her head and looked at King Qin in surprise. He actually saw her awkwardness. Furthermore, King Qin's awakening surprised Gu Huayu. In this era, men are gods and women are just subordinates to men. It is normal for men to have 3 wives and 4 concubines. There are very few lifelong couples like Ye Shangshu and Mrs. Jin, Ye Cheng, and Mrs. Jian. She was the one who started talking today. Shouldn't he take the opportunity to educate her and pave the way for him to have a group of wives and concubines in the future? King Qin saw Gu Huayu looking at him blankly, reached out and poked her forehead, and asked softly, "What's wrong? Are you stupid?" Gu Huayu looked at King Qin in disbelief and said, "Qinjian, if you really take that position, you will be the most noble person in the world." King Qin nodded, "I know, so what? So what? The emperor should not." Gu Huayu said, "You have become the most noble person in the world, and many people will send all kinds of beauties to you." Before Gu Huayu could finish speaking, the king of Qin interrupted her, "As long as I am willing, even when I am the king of Qin and I am the 6th young master who is not favored by the British government, many people will send all kinds of beauties to me." Gu Huayu knew that King Qin was telling the truth. He looked at King Qin speechlessly. Seeing that Gu Huayu couldn't answer, King Qin sighed slightly and said seriously, "If that position makes you so afraid, then I don't want that position." "Don't," Gu Huayu blurted out to stop him. King Qin looked down at Gu Huayu and asked, Do you want me to fight for that position? Gu Huayu shook her head and said, I don't want you to fight for it. That position is not an easy job. There are endless things to discuss and endless comments to make when you sit on it. I worry about the people of the world, I don't have any free time. King Qin's eyes flickered, and he asked with some expectation, what does that little language mean? The king of Qin was eager to hear what Gu Huayu meant. These days, although my father did not explicitly say that he would inherit the throne from him, that was what he meant. Gu Huayu sighed and said, ever since your life experience was revealed, I have been in a conflict. As a prince, you have your responsibilities. I can't be selfish and only think about myself, alas. King Qin hugged Gu Huayu tightly and said softly, Xiao, you are the second person to tell me that the position is not easy, and you have to worry about the hard work of the people in the world. Gu Huayu looked up at King Qin and said, I am the second one. The first one is the emperor. King Qin nodded, yes, the first one is the father. Others, such as the British Duke, told me about that position, saying that the British Duke's palace and the wise king are one. When the wise king sits in that position, the British Duke only then can the government have tremendous power and endless glory and wealth. Gu Huayu said, it is understandable for the British prince to think this way. Sitting in that position will indeed bring you tremendous power and endless glory and wealth. King Qin nodded and said, but if you want to wear the crown, you must bear its weight. That position carries the rise and fall of a country, so how can you sit on it casually? Gu Huayu nodded, that's true. The emperor is in his prime years, and he will be in that position for at least 20 or 30 years. King Qin's eyes lit up and he asked, Xiao, do you still know how to read Shaoyuan? Gu Huayu shook her head, no, I will judge the health of the body from the appearance. Judging from the emperor's complexion that day, he was in good health. If nothing happens, he will have no problem living until the end of his life. So, let's not think too much about the throne and just be your king of Qin. Qinjian, are you hungry? I'll ask Lonicera to bring some food, okay. King Qin was in a good mood after hearing this and nodded, okay. Gu Huayu opened the door, raised her voice to call Lonicera, and ordered, send some food, more quantity, and 2 pairs of bowls and chopsticks. Lonicera bowed her knees and turned around to go out. Gu Huayu returned to the house and saw King Qin playing with Qingfeng in his hand, and was so nervous that his heart rose to his throat. When she saw King Qin just now, she seemed to have put Qingfeng on the soft couch in a hurry. King Qin heard the sound, turned his head and looked over, raised the ring on his hand and asked, what is this? Gu Huayu walked over, took the ring, held it in her hand, and said, a ring. King Qin said, this ring is exquisitely made and looks old. Gu Huayu twitched her lips and said, yes. By the way, did you see King Qi's people when you came? Gu Huayu responded vaguely at first. She had not yet thought about how to tell King Qin about space affairs, so she quickly changed the subject. As soon as King Qin heard about King Qi's message, he turned his attention away from the ring. He replied, no, have you met King Qi's people? Gu Huayu nodded, yes, when I got out of the car to pay, I saw your 2 guards and Wei Tian beside King Qi. It seems that when we met by chance on the street before, King Qi saw you and asked Wei Tian to follow you, King Qin said. Gu Huayu nodded, that's how it should be. Be careful when you go back later. The king of Qin nodded in agreement. Lonicera came in with food. When he saw King Qin, he was startled for a moment, and then calmly took out the food from the food box and put it on the table. Your Majesty, Princess, the food is ready. Gu Huayu nodded, I understand, go down. The honeysuckle retreated. King Qin had lunch with Gu Huayu and drank 2 cups of tea with her. Gu Huayu knew that there were many things going on in the palace, so she urged him to go back quickly. It was not until Gu Huayu urged him for the 3rd time that King Qin stood up and left. Gu Huayu asked Qing Yu to send King Qin and Rugjuan back to the palace. After King Qin left, Gu Huayu took out Qing Feng and put it in her palm, saying, "You did it on purpose today, right?" Qing Feng lay motionless in Gu Huayu's hand, as if he had been wronged. "You are pretending to be dead now? You were not very energetic when you were in Zikan's hands just now." Qing Feng remained still, as if he could say whatever you wanted. Gu Huayu snorted coldly, "Don't think I don't know about your little tricks. Even if I drop you on the soft couch in desperation, if you hide from him, will he be able to find you?" King Feng's thoughts were touched by Gu Huayu's words. He moved his position and rubbed Gu Huayu's palm with his body, as if to please her and beg her forgiveness. Gu Huayu's tone softened and she said softly, "I haven't figured out how to tell him about the space yet. You can't do this again in the future. Do you understand?" Qing Feng rubbed Gu Huayu's palm again. Gu Huayu put Qing Feng back on her index finger and explained, "Before I tell King Qin about the space, you can't appear in front of him again. Do you understand?" Qing Feng disappeared and stopped listening to her chatter. Back to the Prince of Qin's mansion, the Prince of Qin went to the study and asked someone to call the secret guard and asked, "Have you seen anyone suspicious around Wuotong Lane?" A secret guard stepped forward and bowed and said, "Back to your lord, besides us, there are 2 groups of people hiding around Wuotong Lane." King Qin asked, "Can you tell who he is?" The secret guard shook his head and said, "Back to your lord, the other person is wearing very ordinary clothes. I can't tell whose family he belongs to." King Qin looked at Rugjuan and said, "Can you ask someone to find out who he belongs to?" Rugjuan leaned forward and said, "Okay, I understand." King Qin waved his hand, and the secret guard retreated. Ruan Chu came back from checking the post and came in to report to the King of Qin. He happened to meet Rumen returning with the post. Ruan Chu saw Rumo coming in and wanted to get up and avoid it. King Qin pressed his hands and stopped him, "Xian Yang, you are the commander of the guards of King Qin's palace. You should know about the affairs in the palace. You sit still and don't move. There is no need to avoid it." Ruan Chu was impressed by the magnanimity of the King of Qin. When he received the order to be the commander of the bodyguards in the Prince of Qin's mansion, he had concerns and hesitation, and even some reluctance and resistance. It's just that as a general of the imperial court, it is a basic quality to obey the emperor's orders, so he came. He planned to spend at least 3 months in exchange for King Qin's trust in him. Ruan Chu did not expect that when he came to the palace to take office, the prince was sincere to him in every aspect. Ruan Chu looked at King Qin movedly, leaned forward and said, "Yes, I understand." Rumo first went to see the King of Qin and then went to Ruan Chu to greet him. King Qin looked at Ryujin and asked, "Have you handed over all the posts?" Ruhin leaned forward and said, "Go back to the prince, I handed them all over." King Chen, King Chu, and King Xian replied to me, saying that they would arrive on time tomorrow. King Qi was not in the house, so I only left the post and nothing get a reply. King Qi nodded, "I met King Qi on the way back from the Qingqiu Duke's mansion. He will come over on time tomorrow." "Where is the British Duke's mansion? Has the post been handed over to the Duke?" Ryujin shook his head and said, "The concierge told me that the Duke of Guo was not in the house. I wanted the concierge to forward the message to the Duke of Guo. The concierge quietly told me that the Duke of Guo had led his servants to greet him early in the morning. The prince is not in the capital these days." Ruan Chu asked, "The British Duke personally went to welcome the British Duke's son? This is unreasonable. If the second master of the British Duke's family went to welcome him, it would be reasonable." Ryu Yan nodded, "General, you also think it's strange, right? I don't think it's normal either." After saying that, Ryujin looked at King Qin and said, "Your Majesty, this is not the first time that the Crown Prince has returned to Beijing to report on his duties. In the past, the Duke of the state has never gone to personally greet the Crown Prince. This is the first time, the first time. King Qin frowned slightly and said, he is not welcoming the Crown Prince, he wants to be the first to file a complaint. Who are you suing? Aren't you suing the prince as your own flesh and blood? But the prince is the eldest son of the emperor. This should be a great joy. It should be an announcement of good news, Ruan Chu said in confusion. King Qin thought thoughtfully and said calmly, I am the eldest son of the emperor, which is not a happy event for the British government. On the contrary, my existence is a huge threat to them. Ruan Chu thought of King Xian and immediately understood what King Qin meant. He nodded and said, they say the royal family has no brothers, and this is true. Ru Yan said, what do you mean by this, Lord Guo? Do you want to sow discord between the crown prince and the prince? Your Majesty, what should we do? King Qin did not reply to Ruhin's question and asked, where is the post? Did you bring it back? Rug leaned forward and said, the Duke of the country is not here. I asked the porter to hand the post to Rong'an Hall and let it be transferred to the old lady. King Qin nodded, okay, just hand over the post. As for the rest, it is a family matter of the British government, and it is not inconvenient for us to say more. Ru Yan bowed and responded, yes, I understand, little one. King Qin said, there are a lot of things to prepare in the palace today. Go and help Xi Niang. Ru Li lowered his hands in response, bowed and retreated. Ruan Chu reported the security matters of the past 2 days to the king of Qin, and then stood up to leave. After Ruan Chu retreated, King Qin walked to the desk and sat down. He picked up the book on the desk and flipped through it, but he didn't read a single word. King Qin leaned back and covered his face with the book, thinking about the British Duke and his son. Why did the British Duke go to greet Lu Dinkin? Did he want to plant a thorn in Lu Dinkin's heart before he came to Beijing? The king of Qin was not afraid of Lu Dinkin. Although Lu Dinkin had been his father for 21 years, they had very little communication and were as strange as passers-by. So, whether Lu Dinkin has a thorn in his heart has little impact on him. End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 290. Chapter 290 Attending the banquet. But where is my aunt? King Qin knew in his heart that his aunt's heart was with Lu Dinkin. If Lu Dinkin complained about his affairs, what would his aunt do? She must be sad, right? Mr. Yang made things difficult for her in every possible way, but my aunt could endure it again and again because she cared about one person. Your Majesty, Xi Niang wants to see you for something, Lai Shun came in to report. King Qin took the book off his face, sat up straight and said, please come in. Lai Shun retreated, and after a while, Xi Niang stepped into the house, greeted King Qin and reported, Your Majesty, this morning, Zi Luo went to Shangyun Buzwang on Fenghe Street. Not long after Ziluo left, the owner of Shangyun Buzwang shopkeeper Ma went to the Li Mansion. Shangyun Buzwang is the property of the Li Mansion. Although everything was expected, it still surprised King Qin. How many days had it been since he opened the palace? Before he could do anything else, the other party was already rushing to deliver the letter. King Qin thought for a moment and asked, how many people has your concubine arranged to come in? Xi Niang replied, 4 stewards, 16 maids, and 12 rough ladies. A total of 32 people. King Qin frowned slightly and asked, how many sets of clothes do everyone in the house need in one season? Xi Niang was stunned for a moment and did not understand what King Qin meant. He replied, huh? Back to the prince, in the first year, each of the first-class maids, stewards, and guards will be given 4 sets of clothes every quarter, the second-class maids and second-class servants will be given 3 sets, and the third-class maids, servants, and rough men will be given 3 sets of clothes. Let the mother-in-law give each person 2 sets of clothes. From the second year onwards, everyone was given 2 sets of clothes every quarter. King Qin nodded and asked, "Are these clothes custom made by tailors?" Shi Niang leaned forward and said, "Go back to your lord, yes, they are all made to order by a tailor shop." The king of Qin said, "This expense is not small. We have just established the government, we need money everywhere, and we need to be diligent and thrifty in running the house. From today on, we will make the clothes in the house ourselves. We will invite a tailor and an embroiderer to come back and build an embroidery workshop." All the people assigned by the imperial concubine were placed in the embroidery workshop. Shi Niang nodded repeatedly after hearing this. "Yes, I understand, slave, that you need to plan carefully to live your life." King Qin continued, "My food, drink, and daily life are all in Sheahua Pavilion. This courtyard is large and there are many rooms. In a while, you will have someone clean up a room and use it as a kitchen. From now on, if I eat in the mansion, I will cook it here. Persons whose destination is unclear are not allowed to enter Sheahua Pavilion. For the rest, you can make arrangements for yourself. Let Leshun take charge of the affairs of Sheahua Pavilion and let Leshun make arrangements. The imperial concubine's people are sent to Jigzi Yufang, and the mansion will definitely be short of manpower. I will ask Rugjuan to bring some people back later, and you can make arrangements. If anyone in the mansion, no matter who he is, violates the rules of the mansion, you will send him to Zhuangzi." Shi Niang bent her knees and said, "Okay, I understand." King Qin asked, "Are you ready for tomorrow's banquet?" Shi Niang replied, "Don't worry, Your Majesty, all the slaves and maids have prepared what should be prepared." "Will the princess come to the house tomorrow?" King Qin shook his head. "Xiao Yu has something to do and she can't escape. She won't come over. How should we receive the female relatives when they come?" The king of Qin replied, "None of the princes are married, and the female relatives who come to the palace are from the British palace and the Chinquo palace. Grandma said they would come early, and their aunt and uncle would help greet them then." Shi Niang felt relieved and said, "I understand." In the British government palace, the second wife, Mrs. Li, took her eldest daughter-in-law, Grandma Zhu of the Zhu family, and the second daughter-in-law, Mrs. Li, the younger Li family, chatted with Mrs. Yang in Rong'an Hall. After the marriage decree between the wise king and the third lady of the Prime Minister's palace was issued, the British government seemed to have cleared the clouds and seen the sun, and many good things happened in the palace. First of all, Lv Ziran went to Prince Yen's mansion to serve as the consul. Soon after, Zhu returned to the British government with her son. Grandma Wan came in with the post and said cautiously, "Old madam, Ruhi from Prince Jin's mansion handed over the post." Grandma Wang knew that Luzikan was a taboo for Mrs. Yang, so she felt anxious after receiving the post. Sure enough, Mrs. Yang took a look at the post and became furious. She slapped the post on the table and said, "Is this a banquet? He's showing off to me. Don't go." The room became quiet for a moment. Mrs. Zhu looked at Mrs. Yang, then turned to look at Mrs. Li, who saw that Mrs. Li had no intention of persuading her. So he opened his mouth and said, "Grandma, the notices from Prince Jin's palace have been sent to my door. What if we don't go and we don't get blamed?" Luzikan was named the king of Qin. In Zhu's eyes, it was like burning incense and asking for nothing, but nothing good could come of it. She didn't understand why Mrs. Yang was angry. If such a good thing happened to someone else, they would probably hold a 3-day feast to celebrate. "Why are you here at the British government house? It's like everyone's ancestral graves have been torn apart." When Mrs. Li saw her daughter-in-law speaking, she also persuaded her, "Mother, what Ziran's family said is right. King Qin's opening of the palace is now a major event in the eyes of every family in the capital. King Qin has handed over the notice. If we don't go, we will be left behind." Words of mouth. Mrs. Yang has lived her life as she pleased, not caring what others think. She said, "What other people think is other people's business, and what does it have to do with me? I can't do the things that wrong me." Mrs. Zhu could not stand Mrs. Yang's willful and domineering temper, and said bluntly, "Grandma is right, others think whatever they want. But what about the emperor? Does grandma not care what the emperor thinks?" Mrs. Yang was so angry that she didn't know how to answer the question. She opened her mouth in anger, but couldn't speak. Mr. Li didn't expect that Mrs. Yang would be like this. She looked at Mr. Zhu with admiration. What Zhu said was a very clever question. This is what Mr. Zhu has said. Even if Mrs. Yang is angry, she can't do anything to Mr. Zhu. But if it were her, Mrs. Yang's wishful stick would probably fly towards her. Mr. Li reached out and squeezed little Mrs. Li's hand, gesturing for her to answer. Little Mrs. Li turned back to look at Mrs. Li, who gave Xiao Mrs. Li a look. Little Li came over understandingly and said, "Grandma, my sister-in-law is right. We don't care what others think, but what about the emperor's thoughts? We can't care." The emperor recognized the king of Qin, asked him to recognize his ancestor and return to the clan, took the king of Qin to sacrifice at the ancestral temple, and also asked him to make him the king and open a palace, which shows the position of the king of Qin in the emperor's heart. Now, King Qin has sent us a message, if we don't go. Isn't this going against the emperor? Mrs. Li waited for little Mrs. Li to stop and said, "You two have absolutely no rules. In this house, with my grandmother here, how can it be your turn to speak? Grandma is several dozen years old and has crossed more bridges than you two have walked. How can she still be ignorant of the importance? Why don't you two quickly admit your mistake to grandma?" Mr. Li saw Mrs. Yang's face turned into a horse face and hurriedly sang the red face. As Mrs. Li spoke, she patted little Mrs. Li with her hand. Little Mrs. Li immediately bowed her head and apologized to Mrs. Yang. Although Mrs. Zhu was not happy, she saw that Mrs. Li bowed his head to apologize, so he had no choice but to bow his head and apologize. After Mrs. Li and the other two apologized, they turned to Mrs. Yang and said, "Mother, the Xiren family and the Zigzun family are young and ignorant. They were very offended just now. I hope Mother will not be angry with them." Mrs. Yang was contradicted by her grandson's daughter-in-law, and her face was very dull. There was a feeling of anger in her chest, which could neither go up nor come down. Just when she was embarrassed, Mrs. Li built a ladder for her in time, so Mrs. Yang slid down the ladder. Mrs. Yang waved her hand uncomfortably and said, "Okay, we are all a family, and it's not like the old lady doesn't know. They both have a straight temper and speak upright. How can I, the old lady, be as knowledgeable as the two of them?" Mr. Li felt much relieved when she saw Mrs. Yang coming down the ladder she gave her, and then said, "How will Mother arrange tomorrow's affairs?" Then what, if Mother doesn't want to see King Qin, then Mother rests at home? Let the Zigzun family of Xiren family go to the banquet, and then tell them that the mother is not feeling well and is resting at home, while the daughter-in-law is at home to serve her mother. Mrs. Yang had been lying down for half a year with her waist twisted, so she was very taboo about ominous words. Mrs. Yang raised her head and glared at Mrs. Li, and said angrily, "Bah, bah, bah. You are so good, why is your body so bad? Bad luck? Since he posted the post, I will come over tomorrow to have a look. I am passing by. Now, why can't he be treated to a good meal and tea?" Li flattered her and said, "If my mother comes to visit the palace, the king of Qin will naturally treat her as a distinguished guest and treat her well. Otherwise, he will be rude." After hearing what Li said, Mrs. Yang's eyes lit up and she nodded, "Yes, the British government has raised him for more than 20 years. If he doesn't receive me, an old woman, well, then he will be ungrateful." Mrs. Yang paused for a moment when she said this, then her mind changed and an idea came to her. She looked at Li and said, "Let's go there early tomorrow morning and have breakfast at Prince Qin's mansion. Since the King of Qin has invited us to a banquet, we should be sincere. Tomorrow, except for the concierge, the whole family will go to the King of Qin's mansion to have a lively meal. We will have dinner in the evening and then return to the mansion." Li didn't expect that her casual words of flattery would give Mrs. Yang such great inspiration. Mrs. Zhu was dumbfounded when she heard this. Others were giving banquets, and some people brought all the people there to eat for a whole day. What kind of family did she marry into? It's simply unbelievable. Little Mrs. Li was no less surprised than Mrs. Zhu. She turned to look at Mrs. Li and asked softly, "Mother, is this okay?" Although Xiao Li's voice was small, no one spoke at this time, and everyone in the room heard Xiao Li's words. Mrs. Yang raised her head and looked at Mr. Li and said, "What's wrong with this? King Qin has lived in our palace for more than 20 years. In our palace, from top to bottom, everyone likes him and everyone can't bear to leave him. Now the King of Qin granted him a title and built a palace, and everyone in the palace came to congratulate him. What's wrong with that?" Mrs. Yang's face became filled with anger as she spoke. Mr. Li knew that Mrs. Yang was on the verge of anger at this time, and hurriedly echoed, "Mother is absolutely right, let the whole family go there, it will give face to King Qin." Mrs. Yang saw that Mrs. Li agreed with her statement, her anger dissipated a little, and her face softened a lot. "That's it? Aunt Wang, you go and make arrangements. We'll set off tomorrow at the end of Yin Dynasty. Let everyone gather in the front yard. Anyone who arrives late will have 1 month's salary deducted." Grandma Wang bent her knees and said, "Okay, I will make arrangements now." Seeing that it was a done deal, Mrs. Zhu sighed slightly and thought about what reason she should find to avoid messing around with these lunatics. Mrs. Yang didn't want to look at the faces of Li's mother-in-law and daughter-in-law anymore, so she waved her hand and said, "I'm tired today and want to take a rest. You can go back." Mr. Li took her 2 daughters-in-law to say goodbye to Mrs. Yang and left the house. As the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law left Rong Hall, Mrs. Li couldn't help but ask, "Mother, do we really want the whole family to go to Prince Jin's mansion tomorrow?" Ms. Li sighed and said, "Everything has been arranged, so of course I have to go." Zhu asked, "No one can stop the old lady from doing this?" Mrs. Li looked at Mrs. Zhu and said, "The Duke of the country is not in the mansion, and the old lady is in charge of the mansion. Who can refute the matters decided by the old lady?" Zhu said bluntly, "If we go like this, it would be better not to go. If we don't go, we can find an excuse to excuse ourselves. To do this is to slap your own family in the face. In the past, it was rumored that my grandmother did not treat my eldest aunt and the 6th master well. Tomorrow, my grandmother summoned the whole family to go to the Prince of Qin's mansion for a banquet. At the cusp of this crisis, how can people not think too much? From now on, master, how will the second brother and the others gain a foothold in front of others?" After hearing what Zhu said, little Li turned to look at Li and asked, "Mom, are we still going? How does Mr. Li not know these principles?" There was nothing she could do about Mrs. Yang. He could only say, "The old lady is the elder and she is in charge of the house. Who dares not to listen to her? Let alone go to the Qin prince's mansion for a banquet, even if we are asked to go up the mountain of swords and into the sea of fire, even if the old lady says we should go, we have to go. Otherwise, the charge of unfilial piety will fall on us. So, we still have to go." Zhu said, "But..." Mrs. Li was afraid that Ms. Zhu would continue talking, so she urged, "I know what you mean, and I understand that you are thinking about the house. But we don't have the final say in the house. You two have been out for a long time, go back quickly, it's too late." The child is crying again. MRS Zhu sighed, said goodbye to MRS Lifusion, and went to their respective courtyards. At night, a heavy drizzle began to fall from the sky. By Yinzhen time, the ground was already wet with rainwater and the eaves began to drip. People from the British government gathered in the long corridor outside. There was a chill in the humid air. Some of the maids and women wore few clothes, shivering from the cold and folding their arms. "Let's go back and put on some clothes, it's too cold and I can't stand it anymore," someone suggested in a low voice. "Forget it, we're going to count the number of people soon. If you're not here when we find you, the monthly payment for this month will be gone. Just bear with it, you'll warm up after walking around for a while," the person on the side reminded kindly. Someone murmured in a low voice, "It's such a cold day, why are we going to a banquet?" "Shut up, and be careful if you get slapped," the person next to me reminded him in a low voice. The muttering sounds no longer sounded, and all that was faintly heard were trembling sounds. "The carriages in the mansion are limited. Except for the master, only the steward and the first-class maids can ride in the carriages. The rest can only walk." At the end of Yin Dynasty, MRS Yang got on the carriage. Grandma Wang gave an order, and the carriages and horses of the British government set off from the mansion in a mighty manner. Along the way, passers-by stopped to watch and asked what a good day it was today. Let the British government come out in full force. End of this chapter.